Set isn't necessarily the bad guy. He's not even a guy. He is a principle. When you get up in the morning and you get your podcast going and then suddenly your computer's not opening up, that is set in action. Anything that is opposition is set. So anything, your goal in life, according to the esoteric traditions, are to return back to the source. Anything that gets in the way of that, providing opposition, is set in action. But we need set.
Hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, no problem, but I'd really appreciate it if you would save it to your watch later playlist. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below. Thank you.
Imagine that, Alessi. Someone who's saying the answer somewhere in the middle. Never would have guessed it. Dude, it's music to my ears because all the time on this podcast across whatever topics we do, because we do every different kind of topic here, I'm always bringing up the universal law of physics, which says for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction, which is supposed to mean it creates equilibrium in the middle. And I wish we just lived in a society. Yeah, we'll be talking about that today. I wish we just lived in a society where the pendulum swings weren't here. Like, even if they were here, that would be markedly better. And so to hear somebody like you who, let's call it what it is, like if you really want to monetize things to the max degree, you take a hard opinion in one way or the other. But if you're someone who's like, well, hold on, there's good things here, good things there, don't agree with this, don't agree with that, it can actually have the opposite effect where people are like, oh, f this guy because he doesn't appeal to my exact worldview. But I value that a ton, and I like having voices like that on my podcast. So this is going to be good today.
Yeah. Well, that's just the thing, Julian. It's like everything is so polarized right now.
Yes.
It's either the left or the right. It's this, it's that, it's Republican, it's Democrat,
Yes.
it's alternative, it's mainstream. I am strictly independent. I have no allegiance to either side. I'm only here for true understanding and raising consciousness from my own experience, from my own in-depth research, from my own world travels, and being able to share that with others so that ultimately, if we can help raise consciousness, the world would be a better place.
Excellent. Yeah, and you were one of the OGs getting lawsuits from Billy Carson back in the day, as I understand. What happened there? Because we accidentally just got in the middle of this when we had Wes Huffin here, and then when the episode was coming out, I come at it from a very different worldview than Wes does. I don't agree with his overall standing of like where history is, but like he knows how to back things up. Billy has no idea how to back things up, and you apparently ran into problems with Billy years ago. I assume for calling out some of the yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I can really appreciate what Wes has brought to the table because it's the same, right? I was born Christian, but I wouldn't consider myself a Christian today. I study the world's religions and the ancient religions and the mystery traditions. But I can respect his meticulous scholarship. He's well studied, he's well versed. I mean, he has the books, he's actually reading the books. And that's the problem with Billy, where if you're positing yourself and propping yourself up as an expert, and you're appearing on these television programs or appearing at these conferences and major media outlets, and you're speaking with so much conviction, throwing all these ideas at someone who may not be familiar with them, who may be credulous and may not understand the distinctions, it's easy to kind of get over on people. And so
Yes.
The issue started with me and Billy. There was actually he threatened to sue me. He never did. He lied. He told the general public. Yes, Billy Carson lied. He told imagine that.
I would never guess it.
He literally told his audience, and this hurt me for a while. It's reasons like this why I haven't been able to progress, because if you've got a big audience, people listen to what their cult leader is telling them. They're going to believe it blindly without challenging it. Not everyone, but he told his audience that he had filed a lawsuit against me to basically shut me up and make an example out of me for defamation.
I saw the text. Yeah.
Yeah, I sent you the text. Yeah. I still have the communication between me and Billy on Instagram. He threatened to send a cease and desist, which is nothing new to me, by the way, because I have over 20 years experience. I came from I have a background in the music industry, which is run on IPR, intellectual property. It's not about selling music. It's about the rights of the music. And the music industry is really about lawsuits. It's run by the lawyers.
Yes, that's right.
So cease and desists are nothing new to me. I've received hundreds of them, and I've sent out hundreds of them dealing with artists and musical rights, But yeah, he threatened to sue me for defamation. He said he was going to make an example out of me. And this is way back. Billy's had a few people try to debate him over the years or offer to debate him. Recently, West, okay? Before him, there's another researcher, Archaics. Billy didn't want to take that debate.
But he didn't.
He didn't take the debate because Archaics has a background. There's some legal issues there. And so Billy didn't want to give him the time of day. And Archaics is really well researched. He's hitting the books. I'm not going to say I agree with all of his conclusions.
Sure.
But when it comes to the stuff that he was pointing out about Billy, in most cases, he makes a valid point. But before all of this, years ago, I'm talking about almost half a decade ago, when Billy was even just starting out and just got on, and I've been aware of Billy for a while because I used to run a relatively large Facebook group. It was one of the first esoteric groups on Facebook, known as Adept Initiates. We had a community of over 200,000 people at one time. It was thriving. This is before esotericism started becoming really trendy and cool and popular. I've been into this stuff for a long time. And Billy found his way into the group. So I've been aware of Billy since he was just starting out on Instagram. Fast forward, long story short, when he published his book, he had an appearance on the Jimmy Church radio show, and he mentioned how Sir Isaac Newton translated the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean priest king. Now, he has a book. It's a #1 seller on Amazon right now. And if you go to a category of like Egyptian history, his book is #1, and it's not Egyptian history. It's comical. Anyway, it's a bestseller, and his book is about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. And this is based on the work of Maurice Doreal, all right, who is an author from the 20th century, early to mid 1900s. Okay, so Billy has taken work from this book and claiming that they're ancient texts. And he claimed, the first thing that stuck out for me is he claimed that Sir Isaac Newton had translated the Emerald Tablets, plural, tablets with an S, multiple tablets. And I know that's just not the case because how
do we know that?
When everything came out, maybe 2003 to 2005, somewhere, the Newtons, those documents came out about Newton. And very early on, I was able to analyze and take a look at it. And I know that Newton what he did is he didn't translate the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean priest king. He translated and added commentaries to the singular Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition, which we brought here a replica of here in the studio.
Yeah, this is so cool. I got to hold this up. You can actually, and you guys won't be able to appreciate this as much on camera. I don't think. Maybe you can see it, Alessi, on there. But like, I was trying to get the light. Can you see like the reflection on camera?
It is a translucent bas relief.
It's translucent, but I'll hold it up to the camera so people can see. But pretty cool. I don't know what the it says, but you're going to tell me today.
Well, it's actually, I know what it says only from the translations. I'm not going to pretend that I can read text that I can't actually read. This is in
so
Phoenician
Billy
dialect.
Carson can do something you can't?
Well, according to Billy Carson, he can read the Sumerian cuneiform. He's an expert in all these texts. What Billy Carson is an expert at reading crystallinks.com and alternative blog authors. And he's been around, he spoke at a lot of conferences. So he's picked up bits and pieces from different people along the way. Everyone's giving him the platform, and it is what it is. But this is an Emerald Tablet replica, and this is written in Phoenician dialect, which reads right to left, unlike our language, which reads left to right. It's like Egyptian hieroglyphs, which I can read, by the way.
You can read hieroglyphs.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So I studied Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs under a PhD degreed Egyptologist. I never have gone beyond high school. Right after high school, I just went straight to work and started hustling. But I paid a PhD degreed Egyptologist as part of her program to teach me the Middle Egyptian hieroglyphic language. In addition to that, I've been leading esoteric tours to Egypt for over 10 years.
Yeah, you do tours like all over the world.
All over the world. We do Egypt. We do the Yucatan in Mexico. We do South America, so Peru, Bolivia, Easter Island. I do Turkey. I do Jordan, all through adeptinitiates.com. And if you think this is a shameless plug for my tours, it is. But no, it's deeply rewarding. For me, because we get to facilitate transformational experiences for people. It's not uncommon to have people come together, and I've had people that have met on our trips and got married, had children,
that's so cool.
become friends, because you often feel like you don't have a lot of people to talk about these topics with, the deeper esoteric stuff or aspects of ancient history. So when they come on tour together, you find a lot of like-minded interests from people all over the world. And, a lot of people come for the archaeology. They want to see the sites. They want to hear about the history and the mysteries, and they want to learn also about the alternative theories. But what they don't realize is when they come on my tours, they get so much more in terms of the the groups that you meet, the people you meet. It's actually the interactions in between everything. Everything's amazing, don't get me wrong, but it's the conversations on the bus. It's being able to dine with like-minded people, so they're very powerful experiences, and it's deeply rewarding for me beyond the money. It's much deeper than the money because I get to, one, help raise consciousness and educate people while on these tours, and you just have an experience unlike any other.
And you get to go to all these places and see the stuff you study and be a part. I mean, I'm a history nut, so like going to see like this, in this case, like very ancient things, and like try to understand what these human beings were doing at the time, or maybe someone else from another planet, is a wild, wild thing. And you get to teach it at the same time. It's so cool. It's like scratching the itch. You know what I mean? It's
interesting you say that, Julian, because that is what sort of, in a way, led me into some of this stuff. Extraterrestrials, it could be. Hey, man, I watched Ancient Aliens for 10 years, and before that, I read Zecharia Sitchin and Von Daniken back in the 90s, in my teenage years, coming of age.
You're an OG.
OG. Honestly, it started for me with hip-hop. It was listening to MCs like KRS-One talking about metaphysics, or Killer Priest from Wu-Tang affiliate talking about astral projection, that made me want to understand what is this. Or KRS-One would talk about Egypt as Kemet, KMT. That is the original name of Egypt. Egypt is Greek, Egyptos. The original, word for there are actually many names for the land of Egypt, but one of the more prominent names was Kemet, KMT. And we today say Kemet. We use E, like Kemet. Right. That's an Egyptological convention. Okay, so the hieroglyphs for Kemet are the hieroglyphs for K, M, and T.
Right.
Which give us the word Kemet, which
that's like the guy Land of Chem has the channel. That's what it's a reference to, right? Gotcha. Okay, yeah. But please continue.
Yeah, I don't think the pyramids were chemical power plants, but exactly.
It's an interesting opinion.
I've already scrutinized it. I pulled in a metallurgist and a chemist to look at his theory with me, and it just doesn't hold up. We find that it's baseless when held up under scrutiny. But anyway, that word that he uses, chem, comes from Kemet. That was the name of the land, Kemet, which meant it was the dark, rich alluvial soil that was deposited along the Nile, juxtaposed against Deshert, which was the desert, the red desert. So the red desert, the black alluvial soil, Kemet, desert. They had other names too, like Ta Seti, the land of the bow, or Ta Meri, the beloved land. But Kemet was one big name, and we spell it with an E today because in hieroglyphs, you don't use vowels. There's no vowels in the written language. So what Egyptologists have to do is they'll often take an E to make it easy to pronounce in English. So if the word is KMT, Kem, which is probably more pronounced from the throat, like a chemet, chemet. And we don't know exactly how ancient Egyptian was pronounced either. We have to go off of the Coptic records and what we know about the Rosetta Stone to try to assume what it may have sounded like. No one knows exactly what the ancient Egyptian language sounded like. But the hieroglyphs KMT is for the land. And Egyptologists will add the E in there. It's not that vowels weren't spoken, because vowels were sacred. The priests would do incantations, magical spells, and meditations using vowel sounds, like Om, not saying they used Om, but the vowel sounds, they would pronounce them, but they didn't write it into the written language. But yeah, Kemet is one of the ancient names for Egypt. And yes, I've studied the hieroglyphic language. Wow. I'm not saying that I can read every hieroglyph like newspaper, because it's very complicated. You have to, hieroglyphs, it's a beautiful language. And it doesn't take that long to, within a few months of intensive study, you can get a good grasp of it to the point where you can walk in most museums or come on one of my tours to Egypt and look at the walls of the temples and the stela and the tombs and start to piece everything together. Because honestly, a lot of it is recurring motifs and phrases, and most of it is offerings. Most of the hieroglyphs you see in Egypt is an offering formula. And when you get to distinguish and know, okay, this is a Hetep Nisut, which is a specific offering formula, it becomes easy to...
What do you mean? But a little more expansion on offering for all of us out there.
Yeah, so, for the ancient Egyptians, their worldview was different than ours in a sense. They had a different ontology, a different understanding, right? What is it that fascinates us about Egypt? What is it that calls you to Egypt? It's the big megalithic sites. It's the pyramids. It's
Everything.
The architecture,
Yeah.
everything, right? I think it's deeper than that. It's not so much about the architecture. It's about the consciousness of the people behind it that resonates with us most. And this was a spiritually oriented people who seen this whole, or had an understanding of rather, this whole unseen realm around us of what we say gods. For them, it wouldn't be God, it would be Netcher or Netcheru, many gods. Netcher is an ancient Egyptian god, right? So the ancient Egyptians didn't have gods. They had Netchers, which were principles or aspect of nature and cosmology. In other words, the wind blows. Let's call that Shu. And that is, in a sense, a Netcher. And in Egypt, whenever you have plural, three or more of something, many, you have the sound U. So Netcheru means many. You have the sound E if there's two. So like the word for land in Egypt is Ta. So if you have the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, you have Tawi, two lands. So Ta, Tawi, Tau. Netcher, Netteri if there's two, Netcheru if there's three or more. So they had this concept of the Netchers, which were like spiritual energies or, really principles or aspects of nature and cosmology. Just like the Maya in Mesoamerica, right? They had a veneration for the rain. They had the rain god Cha'ak. It was a way of taking the rain and personifying it, giving it a face, making it an our likeliness. You take the body of a human. The ancient Egyptians would have these anthropomorphic figures where, you have the body of a man and the head of a jackal or a dog, Anubis. Why? This is all esoteric symbolism. It's the body of a man to represent something in our likeness that we can grasp. The ancients struggled to understand physics and metaphysics and explain it like we do today. So they would take an image that's familiar with us, the image of man, and they would put the image of let's say the head of a dog on it. Why? Because they were observers of nature. They weren't glued to their iPhones and going through Discord and running out to Best Buy to buy a new hard drive. They were focused on their surroundings and they were observers of nature and the cosmos. And so they would see that the dog had instincts. You could let a dog go at night and it would find its way back home. It would eat the dead carrion, which had a more deeper, profound symbolic meaning for them where, it would eat the dead to have sustenance, to bring itself life. It represented a cycle. And that is what is expressed in the vast majority of ancient Egyptian symbolism. It's cosmology, it's cycles, it's death and life, it's destruction, creation. And understanding that these things go in cycles. So in order to sustain all of this that is given to us by the creator and the gods, we have to make offerings to appease the gods. The Maya in Mexico did this. You could go to Uxmal and you can see the friezes on the wall. They would, they would burn the parchment and send the smoke. First they would bloodlet. This is the Maya, not the Egyptians. They would bloodlet. They would take
Bloodlet?
Yeah, they would take the bone, the tail of the stingray, and they would the shaman. This was a shaman that would do this. And he would perforate his penis, his phallic member, and the blood would drip onto paper. They would light the paper.
Oh, wait, the shaman was stabbing his own dick?
Oh yeah.
With what?
What is it though? It's a symbol of fertility, right? It's reproduction. This is the part of the body that's going to produce and bring new life. And so the blood would drip onto the paper, the parchment.
Is he like hard when he's doing it?
I can't tell you. I wasn't there, Julian.
like how do you even get that to go?
Yeah. And I don't know what part of the ritual.
What'd you say it was a stingray? The bone?
Yeah, they would use bone basically.
Oh.
You can see it if you When you come on my trips to the Yucatan, you can see it at Uxmal. Up on the frieze, you can actually see the perforated penis. There was a bunch of them. Actually, they removed a bunch of them because, I forget, it was one of the queens that had come there decades ago, and they removed all the phallic symbols. But some of them stayed behind. Anyway.
God, they did that in Rome, too. There's some weird little ties here. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, you can see the perforated penis. And my whole point, though, is that the blood was an offering because blood is the life. We're thriving on the blood. So we're giving back. It's a very beautiful, poetic thing in a sense. We think of it today with our modern, oh, my God, cringeworthy, stabbing. For them, this is what produces life, and this blood in me is a vital essence, and I'm giving it back to Creator that created me in the first place. So by lighting the parchment, it would turn into smoke. And, just like when you're sitting there smoking a blunt, it's a ritual in a sense, and the smoke is going up into the air, and anything that transcends the earth is, in symbolist interpretation, it's spiritual, that which can transcend the earth. And so it was a way of reconnecting with the divine cosmos. And so the Egyptians were the same. They made offerings to the gods, and they had to do it to sustain things in the afterlife. The afterlife was a very, complex.
Can you explain the Egyptian afterlife as they believed it, please?
To the best of my knowledge, sure.
Let's do it.
And for them, there was an afterlife, and they, I hate to say they were obsessed with it, but it seemed to take up a lot of time during this life, our temporal existence, right? This is temporal. This isn't going to last. This is my material self, my physical skin, but it's a meat suit. For the Egyptians, within us, a lot of us today, we have different concepts, different spiritualities, traditions, and religions, but many of us believe in the concept of a soul, right? Do you believe in a soul?
Absolutely.
Okay. What is the soul for you?
That's such a strange question I have to answer, but I would say it's the underlying meaning of someone's purpose on earth.
Okay. How do you distinguish a soul from a spirit? Do we have spirit?
I kind of don't.
Okay.
And this is totally subjective. Like when I talk about someone's soul, I'm kind of like in my head talking about their spirit, but I understand there's different contexts to it.
And it depends who you ask. And different humans are going to give different interpretations, and that's okay. For the ancient Egyptians, it wasn't just a soul. It wasn't one thing. It was comprised of, there were 9 aspects of the soul. 2 of them, you may be familiar with it, are more popular. The Ba and the Ka. Are you familiar with the Ba and the Ka? The Ba, it's like a bird with the head of a man. It's the consciousness of man on the body of a bird because the bird has wings. Anything that has wings can transcend the earth. It's a spiritual creature. The Ka, the symbol for it is usually arms extended to the side and your hands raised up, or there's a hieroglyphic symbol for the Ka. You can pull it up if we can pull up Ka and Ba. Now these are 2 aspects of the soul. There's 9. There's also the Ak. And in the afterlife, so the Ka is your vital essence.
Vital essence.
Yeah, it's what you breathe the moment you're not, and the Rosicrucians, which is Western esoteric organization, share this point of view, this ontology that you're not actually fully, you're alive when when you're in the womb. It's not until you come out of the womb, till you come out of your mother and gasp for your very first breath. That's when the Ka, for the ancient Egyptians, the Ka comes into your body. So when you take that first breath into life, you're infused with the Ka, and it stays with you throughout life. And it is your spiritual double. It's your...
it's C-A, right? It's
K-A.
All right,
Ka.
Because you got a Boston accent.
I got
I don't know if it's K-A-R, and you're
Yeah.
just leaving the R.
Yeah.
I got to make sure.
I got my cockies, and I park the car in the Harvard Yard. We don't pronounce our R's. I'm originally from Boston.
Are you a fucking cop?
Yeah,
Are you a fucking cop?
Tell me, Jimmy, are you a cop? Listen, so we don't pronounce our R's. I have to struggle to pronounce R. In fact, so it's funny. I mentioned the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians have a museum in San Jose, California, the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. It displays they have the largest collection of authentic artifacts in American Northwest from Egypt. They were the pioneers of doing these alternative or spiritual tours to Egypt very early on, before anybody was doing, general before anybody was doing these unique specialty tours, the Rosicrucians were leading spiritual pilgrimages to Egypt, and they developed connections and they brought back a lot of artifacts. And that entire block is amazing. If you ever have the opportunity to go to San Jose, it has its own zip code. They have an alchemy garden. They have the lodge where the Esoteric organization practices its rituals and rites. They have a staff research library, which I've spent entire weekends going through. Like, yeah, literally, I drive a few hours down and spend the entire weekend from open to close in their Esoteric library.
You're allowed to do that as a non...
Yeah, well, now it's actually open to the general public, so anyone can actually go in. In fact, and I've also been granted access to, some things that others haven't had access to, because I worked very close with the Rosicrucians. I produced their series called The Sacred History of the Rosicrucians, which is available for free on YouTube. It goes through all the mystery traditions: Atlantis, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Platonism, Neoplatonism, alchemy, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, all the way up to modern day, the Rosicrucian order, and all of the various mystery schools and their teachings that the Rosicrucians have, that basically still perpetuate today.
Yeah, for real quickly though, for people out there who aren't familiar, can you just explain the basic teachings of Rosicrucianism and what they believe?
The Rosicrucians are a group of mystics that ultimately study natural laws, universal laws, and principles that are immutable principles, basically the ancient wisdom that was perpetuated throughout the mystery schools. They're a modern day mystery school in a sense. Well, not even modern, because they've been around for a while, but what is a mystery school? A mystery school was a center of study in the ancient world where candidates would petition to become initiates, and then they would go through ordeals, various degrees, to learn about universal principles. They would observe silence and go within, go inside to engender a feeling, a connection to the divine, gnosis, right? Because that's ultimately what it's all about, to connect with the divine. It's mysticism in general. What distinguishes mysticism between religion? Where with religion, you're going without for an answer. You're looking up to the sky, or you're going through a priest or a sheikh or a pastor, an intermediary, or you're looking up to the sky praying to a god, or you're putting your head down on the ground praying to a god. Mysticism, you're going within. You're looking inside yourself. And when you go through the various degrees and you develop more of a hermetic understanding that we are God. We are God in the sense that we are not the product of the universe. We are an aspect of his essence.
We're an aspect of his essence.
Right. So take, for example, the Pythagorean mystery schools. You're familiar with Pythagoras.
Theorem.
Yeah, Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
We all know
Triangle,
the
side.
Pythagorean triangle from school, but we can't even prove that Pythagoras ever existed. We never found his bones.
What?
We only
What do you
know
mean we haven't found his bones.
We only know about his teaching. Well, it's not uncommon in the mystery school traditions. Aristotle, a lot of these figures, in some cases, they're meant to. It's esoteric symbolism. They're meant to represent archetypes. In other cases, it's a group of people writing under one pen name.
Just like Hollywood, where they take a bunch of characters and make a composite.
Which makes it really easy for me to understand, because I have a background in Hollywood and the music industry, and there's so much smoke and mirrors that goes on in the music industry that when I got into this space, I was quickly able to distinguish through a lot of the BS. In the music industry. What's that?
No Diddy. You got to say that now.
No Diddy. It's interesting. Actually, somebody just posted a photo of me and Diddy together on the internet. Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah. I don't want your algorithm to tank now.
No, it's okay.
I've never been friends with Diddy or affiliated with Diddy. I'm a hardcore hip-hop head. Right from the beginning, we weren't down with Diddy. We thought that was all that jiggy bullshit, mindless materialism and money and flashy clothes. I was more into the underground, conscious lyricism, the real hip-hop, right? I grew up with the hip-hop culture. And so for us, Diddy was like a cancer cell in the culture, Biggie was an incredible rapper, but Diddy was just a poison. And so what happened is somebody found a very old photo of me before even the dreadlocks. You can see I have short hair. He's an alternative researcher, and there's a whole league of alternative researchers.
Oh, the guy who found it.
Yeah, debunking Dan Richards. He's in alignment with Graham Hancock and Jimmy Bright Insight, and he.
I know this guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So debunking Dan, we got into a little Twitter feud lately.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Come on. Got to rise above it.
Well, I am trying to rise above it. But what I'm saying is in that process, he made some statements and I challenged him to bring evidence for the statements he was making, and he couldn't. And in turn, he was just trying to defame my reputation.
With the Diddy
so he
picture.
found the old picture of Diddy that he probably pulled off, my Twitter or Facebook. And I had pointed out how, look, if you could, and then he tried to suggest that, I was at Diddy parties and I was involved with this whole racket, this
Were
whole
you?
disgusting. Come on, man. And it's like, what's disgusting, like I have family and I have people that know me know I would never be involved with this nonsense.
Yes.
People that have known me my whole life, and throughout the hip hop days and music industry days, I was never down with Diddy. Diddy is whack to us.
You know what? And this has to be said too, because people have this idea that like Hollywood or the music industry or the movie industry are all like they live under the same, like literally in the same room together at all times. And that's not how it is. Is there some weird shit that goes on? Obviously, there's some horrible
Definitely.
people.
Yeah.
But like you look at this, there was a story, I believe it was, I still got to go check this. I think Mike Tyson, I'm pretty sure he told it himself on his podcast, but it was told to me secondhand. But Mike Tyson was explaining a scenario where this kind of, what a picture can look like and how it affects people, especially when they have a big platform. And it's like, he said he was at this party, like very public party, with cameramen everywhere taking pictures of whoever, celebrities, non-celebrities, the whole bit. And some guy comes up to him like, "Oh my God, Mike, I'm the biggest fan, bro. I'm so happy to meet you," whatever. He's like, yeah, man, no problem, thanks, whatever. And then like the cameraman's right there. He's like, "Oh, can I get a picture of you?" He's like, "Yeah, we'll do it." So they take a picture, and then a week later, FBI shows up to his house and goes, "Mr. Tyson, we got to talk with you." He's like, "About what?" And they're like, "How do you know this man?" And they hold up the picture of them like glad hand and like they've been friends forever. Turns out the guy murked like 4 people that weekend before. He was like a serial killer
And
or
Tyson
something.
had no idea.
And Tyson's like, "Listen, man, he was just a fan. I met him at a party. I have no fucking idea who this dude is." And they're like, "Okay, whatever." But he goes, "Forever people are going to ask me about that picture." So when you look at the Epsteins, when you look at the Diddys, when you look at these people who are around all these powerful places, all they had to do was get a picture with you or say you were at the same place. And now forever, in this case, it even happened to you, like someone can be like, "Oh, how do you know this guy? What were you doing with him?" And it sucks because there's always going to be that 1% out there where people are like, "Oh, maybe he did know him," or whatever. And I empathize with that because it's like, I don't know who the fuck I've taken pictures with in my life or what they're going to be accused of later. Like, who's
on your podcast right now?
Exactly, bro. Exactly. So it's like, hindsight's 20/20 on these things.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It calls for context.
Yes.
And that's what's so important, even in my space, history and alternative history. Context. This situation with Diddy, where Debunking Dan is putting a picture out and trying to mislead people into believing that I was part of this disgusting stuff that Diddy was doing, which is not true. I literally talked about the context in the picture. It was actually taken mid-argument between me and Diddy. I was getting close to being physical.
You were arguing with Diddy?
Yeah, he was coming to steal my artist, man. I told him he can't get up on that stage. It wasn't at a Diddy party. It was at South by Southwest in Texas, Austin, Texas.
When was this?
15
15 years ago, 20 years ago?
More than 15. It would probably be like 2008, 9, 10.
Wow.
Maybe.
Diddy was trying to.
Yeah, I was active in the music industry throughout like the 90s into 2000s and but yeah, so what happened was I had an artist who was emerging. I'd spent a couple of years working with him, developing him, putting money into him, working day and night. You know what it's like. You wake up in the morning, you go to the gym, you go for a walk to clear your head, and then you're working all day till 11 at night sometimes. That's what it was like for me in the music industry to build this artist up, and others. And I worked hard at this. And this was like a big crowning achievement because he was headlining a big show. It was our show basically, and he was the headliner, and he was making waves from the work and money and effort that we were putting in addition to his talent, but we were helping drive that. And this wasn't uncommon. I have other friends in the music industry that were like, "Oh, just wait till Diddy starts showing up on the tour bus, try to steal your artists," and so it happened. And so Diddy flew into Texas specifically to get on stage, just thinking I'm Diddy and I can do whatever I want. And he did. He managed to get past me. And then, just to get up on stage to align himself with my artist, to hang on to relevance, right? Diddy's already getting old and trying to remain relevant with the young, cool kids. And that's what happened. And so he was there, and I explained to him a bit who I was and what my situation, my position was with this artist. And I was like, no, this is performance. You can't get up on stage. We got into an argument. Diddy got pissed, and his bodyguards started coming around. And right as we got into, and I was getting heated, and right during the argument, somebody from the press came over. They knew who I was because I was a CEO of I started literally the first genre-specific digital retail store in hip-hop. I had a big emerging digital label. I pioneered a lot of stuff. My company, my efforts, we were in Rolling Stone, Billboard, XX magazine said Anyextee is the person to speak to about the future of the music industry. We put out the first podcast in hip-hop history.
You did?
We did the first live web stream in hip-hop history. We did the first digital downloads, first digital albums. I was like on the phone with ISR.
You're like the godfather of the hip-hop digital age.
The untold story.
Yeah, the untold story.
Yeah, and I go back way before that, because before that I was putting out vinyl records and CDs. I was doing distribution. I owned multiple record labels. I managed artists. I was an artist myself. So I've worn a lot of hats in the music industry. But in this particular role, I told Diddy, no, it's not happening. And we were getting into an argument, and somebody from the press came over, and they were like, oh, the CEO and Diddy. I was like, let's get a picture of you two together. So we're like fighting with each other, arguing, and then we turn and we take the photo. And if you find the photo, you'll see that...
Let's find the photo. I need it. Diddy and Anyextee.
Yeah, see if... I don't know if it'll come up that way.
You could try it on Twitter. Type in Diddy and Anyextee.
Yeah. If you go to... Yeah, try that.
How's this for? This is transparency. See what you're doing? You're telling us to pull it up.
I'm just trying to be my true, authentic self, man.
I love that. That's
well, because there's no skeletons in my closet. I'm happy to elaborate and let people know what really happened. I think context is important.
I agree.
And if we just look at things on the surface, things are not always what they appear to be. This is why I'm an esoteric researcher. Yes. I like to go deeper and look.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's see.
Anyextee, not tree. Sorry.
Anyextee.
All right, go to media, and let's see what we got. Down. See, it might have already gotten wiped.
Try. It'll be on Dedunking Dan. Go to Dedunking Dan, and then you might just have to scroll down. A bunch of tweets.
You got to talk to our mutual friend Luke, because Luke Caverns is like, he's the Mr. No enemies. Talks with everyone, whatever. I know
Luke's everybody's friend,
right? He talks with Dan. He talks with you. Like, stuff like this should not play out in public.
It'll be DEDUNK. Or I think he calls himself Super Sexy D now. Man, I don't even know.
Type in Dan Richards and then go to people, and let's see what we can do here.
There
Dan
he is.
Richards.
No, yeah, there he is. Here's Dan Richards.
Okay,
go to maybe his media. Where would it
go to media?
Media, and then you'd have to scroll down a bit.
All right, let's see if we can find this picture.
Keep going. It was a couple of weeks ago.
All right. No. That was him
right there.
on
There it is
Rogan.
to the right. Me and Diddy. Before the dreadlocks.
That's you?
That's me.
That's you.
It's me before the dreads.
No, it's not.
It's
What
Anyextee.
the fuck?
And I had dreads before that too. I had dreads in the early 90s. I cut them out. But yeah, this is years ago, man.
What a shirt, by the way. It just says cocaine.
Yeah.
He was different. Yeah. Wow, that's you.
Yeah.
You got Egyptified. Something happened.
I had dreads before this, so this was a period of my life where the music industry was transforming me, and that's why I got out of the music industry. But the whole point, look at our faces. Nobody looks happy.
Not happy.
Why? We're in the middle of an argument, and there's event staff behind us. His bodyguards are behind him.
Although I just gotta say, if we were doing some green lines,
yeah,
he's straight and you're tilted. I'm just saying.
Wait, what's the meaning of that?
Well, that means he's got the leverage.
Psychological. Yeah, I'm also tall and lanky, so I kind of tend to lean off to one side. But it's also because I'm probably up in his face, like, you are not coming on stage.
That's exactly what it looks like.
And he's like, whatever, man. So anyways, long story short, he ended up on stage, and I couldn't flex past his bodyguards. I tried. But anyway, long story short, never been a fan of Diddy. This picture's taken out of context. What's he saying? How much baby oil? See, ridiculous. You know, absolutely disgusting. And to do this, to try to hurt my reputation, I didn't even attack him in a way where, you know, I was saying anything negative. I was basically like, hey, here's what I'm trying to correct and set the record straight, bring the facts.
Hit show more on Anyextee's response. Alas, let's get this on the record for people. I want to read this.
Well, we're also referencing Jimmy Bright Insight here, another one of my #1 fans.
All right, Jimmy Corsetti and you made the claim that I'm lying and accused me of fabricating my mentorship with JAW.
That's John Anthony West.
Okay. These accusations are untrue, and worse, they're being used to distract from Jimmy misleading the public. You also falsely claimed I worked for JAW for a short period and that this was the extent of our relationship. This is a bold and damaging lie, revealing how low you're willing to go. It's also an example of debunking without proper research exactly what you claim to oppose yet actively participate in. Since you made the accusations, the burden of proof is on you to back them up. I've already agreed to present my evidence once you provide yours. I even offered to wager money on it, but you won't accept because you know your claims are baseless, designed to tarnish my reputation and frame me as a liar. You're a good writer. As for the P. Diddy nonsense, no, I'm not in any of his tapes because I never attended the parties. Not even one?
Not even one.
Okay.
We wouldn't go. Diddy's whack. Why would we go to a Diddy party?
Just making sure. That picture was from when Diddy crashed my event in Texas to try to get on stage and poach the artist I spent time and money developing. I told him no, and it led to a heated argument interrupted by the press who took that photo. Neither of us is smiling because we don't like each other. I've always seen Diddy as a culture vulture and a charlatan, much like some people in this space. What do? You dig up an old photo and distort the truth, trying to make it seem like I was aligned with Diddy. That's a low and disgusting tactic, but it speaks more about you than it does about me. Wow.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
Dropping the mic there. I respect it, man. I understand exactly what you mean. Context is everything, and people will just try to they'll create a red herring. It has nothing to do with the argument you're having right now. Like, oh, what were you doing with Diddy? And they can attack you, but you're in the music industry for a long time.
And it's all around. That's why I get out, man. It's all smoke and mirrors, right? And in some ways, you know, like, all right. So for me, I remember I was always in the hip hop culture, but I got into the more lyrical, you know, thoughtful hip hop, positive hip hop, conscious hip hop. But as I expanded my business, I realized that's not what sells. We had an incredible group from the Bronx known as the Juggernauts. They're African Americans. They're school teachers. They're very intelligent. The main MC, Breeze Bruin, is an incredible lyricist. You ever going to hear them on the radio? No. Maybe college radio, underground radio, but no, because it's not sex, drugs, rock and roll. That's what's mostly on the radio, right? Yes. It's pushing a specific stereotype. And I remember when I was in the music industry, I was part of it in a sense, when I would produce music videos for our artists. When the video is over, the chain comes off the rapper's neck and goes back to the jeweler. Yeah. The fancy cars go back to the dealership. The clothes that they're wearing goes back to the stylist who brings it back to the shop. The pretty girls that are all over them in the video, they all go home at the end of the video. Yep. It's all smoke and mirrors. And what I realized is that I was part of that machine that was facilitating these negative stereotypes. And, you know, I don't want young people to see this. And I'm seeing the young people watch these videos and trying to imitate the artists, the rappers. Yes. And it's all fake. And that's what sells. And the industry is driven to push that stereotype. So, you know, people get caught up in it. And in a sense, like me, I feel like I became sick. You know, I felt like even in the industry side as an executive, the rappers have to do it. We had to do it. It was like keeping up with the Kardashians. I became very successful in the music industry at one point. And I don't come from money, actually. Like I said, I never went to university. I grew up across the street from a housing project out of, you know, south of Boston.
Where south of Boston?
Specifically, we want to get really into...
Not Charlestown.
Even further south. All right?
You're not robbing a bank out there,
Even further than Charlestown, okay? All the way down to Fall River, Massachusetts, home of Lizzie Borden, the axe murderer.
Oh, yeah, I know Fall River.
Yeah, okay. Fall River. So I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, raised in Fall River, and then later in my life, I moved, my early adulthood, I moved to Boston, lived in Boston for over a decade, then moved to California. So, you know, I come from an area where... specifically Fall River, 50 miles south of Boston, there's not a lot of universities. Education isn't that great. There's high school dropout rates. There was major problems with heroin back in the day. Everyone's depressed. You know, I grew up in the hood. I grew up across the street from a housing project. You know, I've seen a lot of stuff already in my teenage years that most people won't see in a lifetime. and experience these things. And most of the people I grew up with never leave the neighborhood. When I moved to Boston, it was a big deal. He's going 50 miles south to the big city. And I use that opportunity because I didn't go to college to ear hustle. I would go sit at the cafe outside of Harvard and listen to what all the students and teachers were saying. That's how I developed and like, learn. I self-taught myself. Like when I graduated high school, I didn't know how to tell time on a regular clock. I needed digital. I had never read a full book all the way through. And I didn't know my months in the order. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. I didn't know any of that. I don't,
At the end of high school.
Yeah. A lot of people dropped out in high school. There was a lot. How'd I get through it? I don't know. Must have cheated my way. Maybe I wasn't in class the day they went over that. But it's not that I didn't have the intellectual capacity to learn. I was a product of the environment, and I was a product of that school system.
What were your parents around?
I had two parents. They're great parents. It was just the environment we lived in. In fact, they moved us out. I had an older brother, and he got into a lot of trouble. And like later in life, they moved us out to the suburb.
Were they working a lot? Your parents too?
That's the thing. They were working 24/7. My mom and my dad.
Putting food on the table.
Putting food on the table. Yeah. So
Respect.
I was actually like. Back then they would refer, if we're talking about classism, they would refer to it as like lower middle class. And being that, I was like the wealthiest kid on the block because I actually had toys. My parents bought me Star Wars figures and G.I. Joe figures and stuff. None of the other kids in my neighborhood had that, so they'd all flock to my house because I was the rich kid. But we weren't really rich. We were just getting by. I didn't even have money to get into university. I was that ignorant. I didn't even know how to get into college, and I didn't want to. Back then, especially where I grew up, it wasn't cool to read. You're a geek if you read. What are you reading for? It wasn't until my 20s that I realized all of that was backwards and that I had, this ignorant sense about things. I wanted to expand my consciousness. And when I got to Boston and I started meeting educated people who were going to university, then when I started traveling to the music industry and you get to California and you're around all the, the hippies and higher consciousness, then you start traveling the world and you see how different cultures operate. It just expands your consciousness. And that was what the journey was like for me, moving from south of Boston into Boston proper and then over to California.
But you said, and we're going to we're weaving around here. We're going to come back to Rosicrucianism at some point because we were on it. But you had also said that you initially got interested in like the esoteric or ancient history topics literally through hip hop and hearing that in high school. Who'd you say was KSR?
KRS-One. Blastmaster KRS-One would rap about metaphysics. And that's why I went on a tangent about Kemet, because he was the first one to rap about, use the word Kemet in a rap. What's Kemet? Egypt? I knew Egypt.
And you couldn't Google back then.
There was no Google. There was no YouTube.
So what are you doing?
Eventually, it's books. You carry that with you. And then later, I became a book geek. Like I'm a voracious reader. I've got stacks of books on the side of the toilet. I've got books by my bed. I've got books in every room of my house. People will often criticize me because I'm always wearing sunglasses. What do you think? You're cool? No, it's because I've got what I call scholar eye, bags under my eyes from being up till 3, 4 a.m. reading.
I'm going to use that.
Scholar eyes.
Okay.
And then you just hide them with the sunglasses.
Yeah, that's right.
So, which is a trick from the music industry. Oh, your eyes look like shit. Put these sunglasses on and get in the video.
Oh, wow.
There's so much that goes on in the music industry. Like, it was as a CEO of a record label, it was a prerequisite to read the 48 Laws of Power.
Oh, Robert Greene.
To study neuro-linguistic programming, color theory, eye accessing cues. You know what eye accessing cues are?
Eye accessing cues.
It's a part of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and it's been employed, experimented, CIA and FBI, basically. And I used to use it all the time in the music industry. You're doing interviews with artists, and you're in the boardroom. You have to know how to read people, not just their words. So, eye accessing cues. Your eyes move. They access different parts. It's
like
somewhat
up,
speculative,
down, side.
Right? Yeah. So the upper part is, either creative. One side is for creative. So our the right side is for creative.
Yep.
The left side is for remembered. So this is how you can tell if somebody's lying. Usually, it's not 100% accurate science.
Yeah.
But in most cases, I can watch the pattern of your eyes, and I can ask you a story. I can say, Julian, what does a purple elephant with pink dots look like? Now you're aware of it, and you know, so your eyes may not move now, but typically,
you're actually asking me right now.
Well, see, you're not even aware. But
okay.
if I ask you a question that requires you to think, you're going to access a part of your brain to either pull it from memory or you're going to create it. If you're lying, you're creating.
Yes.
Not always, but if you're lying, you have to create something. So if your eyes don't go to the left side, which shows me you're remembering, now I know you're creating. So it's possible you be maybe fabricating a story, and you can access thoughts, feelings, you know, depending on the direction of the eyes. Anyway, long story short, color theory. You have to understand color theory. You, as a podcaster, you use red and white in your thumbnails. I'm sure it's intentional. It's a classic marketing. If anybody studies marketing, color theory, red is an impulse color. You've got the red curtain. It's symbolic, and it actually affects us physiologically, psychologically, which then affects us physiologically. Because it's why
I can't take credit for those. My mom got those, but yeah, you're right.
I thought you were just trying to emulate Joe Rogan with the red curtain.
Oh, don't even get me fucking started, bro. So she when I was in the old studio in my parents' house, if you look like pre-episode 50, I had like, you know, just to set up like false background or whatever. Yeah. And my mom like couldn't keep looking at it. And she's like, I am going to get you curtains. I'm like, no, I can't afford them. No, I'm getting them. I'm like, if you insist. So she goes and gets curtains before episode 50 with Riley Horvath. And I remember the day they got there and we were putting them in, he opened up the new studio with red curtains. And I was like, oh no. And I'm like, fuck. And my mom's like, no one's going to care. I'm like, oh, you don't know the internet, Jesus Christ. But I'm like, well, all right, we'll see. No one bothered me about it for like 2.5 years there, or 3 years more at the studio. Then we come here. Danny Jones flies up here with me to design the studio. And he's like, yeah, just put the curtains on this side, whatever. You'll be on that side. I'm like, okay, great. And then the first day, oh, are you Joe Rogan with your curtains? I'm like, oh, yeah, because Joe Rogan invented fucking red curtains. Like, oh, dude, that is such a pain point for me. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like we got to get on with life here, but
I don't know. I seen Rogan do it. I seen Julian Dorey do it. I'm like, if all the great podcasters are doing it, I'm gonna need to get a red curtain for my content now. But you know what I was saying about the color red, you know, and you know, this whole idea of like, we have to, it's not just music. You have to study people. It's psychology. You're studying psychology and human behavioral patterns when you're in the music industry if you want to be successful. And red, you know, Target stores, Stop and Shop markets, it's an impulse color. When you go to check out in any store and you've got all your candy bars, how many of them have a red wrapper with white? Why do marketing people, you know, a lot of thumbnails, red on white? Because that color red does something to us.
Yes, it does.
Subconsciously. It triggers something. We're already conditioned to stop at a red stop sign, a red stoplight, without even reading the word stop. We see the color red. What it does, it triggers our fight or flight response. And then we get this impulse. And that's why red is the color of passion and love. And, you know, but it's also a color that, you know, has a physiological effect on us. And so why is it at the impulse items? Why the candy, like right before you're checking out, remember you might want to buy a candy bar, which I don't recommend because it's all sugar and it's going to cause cancer. It's all poison. But, you know, it's to get you to stop. Yes. Red is to get you, just like your thumbnails is to get you to stop and click. That's so right. we had to go through, you know, color theory, human behavioral patterns, all of this stuff, neurolinguistic programming, you know, read the 48 laws of power. And I don't agree with everything Robert Greene, but they're all founded on like universal laws and principles and you know,
he
human
makes some good cases for sure.
He certainly does. So, but all of that goes into this whole dynamic of the music industry. And, you know, there's a lot of fake stuff in the music industry, images. Back then you wanted to, you know, the saying, fake it till you make it, or to be successful, one must project the image of success. Yes. That's what we were doing. So even if you didn't have the money, and that's what the rappers are doing, even if you don't have the success,
act like you do.
Act like you do it. And in some cases, when you be it, you'll eventually, like begets like, you'll eventually become it. So there is something to that. But at the same time, man, I found myself trying to keep up with the Kardashians. Literally, when I was making serious money in the music industry, every Saturday morning, I was going to Newbury Street in Boston to Riccardi, one of the most expensive stores, buying $2,000 leather belts imported from Italy, $3,000 sneakers, $10,000 jeans. No exaggeration.
$10,000 jeans?
Maybe 10. No, I take that back. It'd be like $2,000 to $3,000 jeans. I say 10. That number is in my head because I would go on a Saturday morning and drop 10 grand. like every Saturday. When I was at the peak in the music industry, when I had money, I would go.
Because you felt like you had to.
Well, because one, I had the money and I don't come from money. So when you don't have money and you get money, you spend it foolishly. In hindsight, I wouldn't do these things now. I was much younger and more immature. You know, I don't even have a house now. I don't have the money I have anymore. That's all gone. You know, I'm just getting by now. But back then, you know, you had to keep up. Oh man, Kanye's got the freshest shit. I got to get on top of the game. I'm going to go to this event. They're all going to be there. I need to have the freshest shit, you know? So I got to spend the money, and that costs money.
Absolutely.
Oh, we've got an artist. We got to make him look successful. Like he's doing his thing. We got to put all the money into buying, you know, the clothes for the artist, but it's all fake and it's sick. And and then I realized like I was caught up unconsciously doing this. And then I realized I could be doing better things with my money, like traveling the world and pursuing my penchant for exploring ancient civilizations and indigenous traditions and the Western esoteric tradition, getting to the core of all the things that drive me. Because I was self-made. I had to read on my own. I had to educate myself on, how do you start a company? How do you build how do you do all of this stuff? And then you realize that as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you can relate, your company, your brand, is only as good as you are.
That's 100%.
If you're sick, the show's got to go on, right? So,
that's right.
And that sickness can manifest not only physically, mentally, spiritually,
Absolutely.
Emotionally. You got to make sure all these things are in check so that your company is a reflection of you. So I would read all the books. I would go now I've transitioned from not reading, thinking reading's not cool, to go into Barnes and Nobles and buying every book on the shelf in the spiritual section or the self-help section or the business section, going through them all until they get to the point where the books on the shelf at Barnes and Nobles no longer serve you. And the world's, I've always had questions about religion that, my parents couldn't answer, the priests at Sunday school, catechism couldn't answer, and then I grew up in a diverse, multicultural area. So, there are other people, there are Jewish kids, there were kids from India. And when you find out that they have different understandings of the afterlife or different traditions, you start to question your own. But it gets to a point where now I want to go to the root of the source. You see these guys behind me? What are they? They're gangsters.
Well, most of them.
Most of them.
Yeah. Frank, halfway. Don Draper, context, I guess. The other one's pretty much, yeah.
Gangsters in the sense that they go to the source. Not necessarily that they're bodying people and leaving them in the ocean. See, a gangster is one who doesn't allow society or the government to govern him. A gangster is one who knows how to govern himself and go directly to the source. That's what makes them so powerful. They went to the source, they had the good stuff. You have to go to the gangster and, to get it or whatever. So my point is, I'm not a gangster in terms of bodying people and, burying someone, dropping them off with the fishes.
Good, because I'll put you in the fucking Meadowlands, pal.
Yeah. I'm in Jersey. Shout out Tony Soprano. No, but a gangster is someone who's going to go to the source. And spirituality, it's going to the source. Yeah. It's where did all this come from? What were the earliest texts that inspired Christianity? The Gnostic texts, the Hermetic texts, where they come from? Oh, you start realizing, a lot of seems to come out of Egypt. The principles are already in Egypt.
So this sounds like, to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm just trying to follow along with the timeline of what you're describing. As you're from the 90s, graduating high school, going through the rest of the 90s, throughout the 2000s in the music industry, being really successful in that, getting caught up in some of the stuff you talked about in the music industry, keeping up with the Kardashians and shit like that. Like, you all along are getting more and more interested in your own exploration. And then at some point, snap, and you're like, I'm done with this music shit. I'm sick of it. I want to go do this full time. Was there, like, I'm sensing something, but I don't know if I'm onto it. Like, was there also like some sort of, I don't want to like over dramatize this, but like some sort of like personal spiritual crisis about like your search for meaning in the world because of the industry you were in, that you started to not like the things you saw, and then you started to love the research and wonder what that all meant?
Yeah. It gets to a point where it's like, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? And why am I doing this? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? I've always questioned these things. I've always had I've always been very curious since I was young. I didn't always, early on I would accept what the authority, my mom says it must be true. But then you go to you go to elementary school and you start getting beat up and you're like, wait a minute, my mom said if I'm a good kid, everybody would like me. Well, I was a good kid. Now I'm the geek that everybody's picking on. you know, and then you develop a little more. Then you stop fighting back and you become a gangster. But no, then, but you go through this process and it's like, you know, I acquiesced to authority, to my parents, to school, to religion early on. And when that didn't work for me, and then when I had, you know, with religion, I started questioning religion early on. But then by the time later in my like early 20s, now I'm reading more. So now I can go back and look into the stuff. But I'm also trying to educate myself on being a better person. And I'm devouring it. And then I'm trying to go deeper. And I'm trying to go to the source. I'm trying to see, you know, if I read a book, the way I read a book now is I go to the back of the book and I look at all the references and I look at where they're getting their material from and I go to the reference. And then I go to their references until I can get as close to the source as possible, because ultimately that's what it's all about, developing true understanding and getting closer to the objective reality. Yes. Because there's my reality, there's my story, there's your story, and then there's this objective reality.
Yes.
That comes from the source. And if the mystery traditions are correct, we're an emanation of that source. And our purpose in life is to return to the source. And that is what Horus is symbolizing, what Jesus is symbolizing, what Kukulkan of Mexico is symbolizing, the principle of return to source, spiritually speaking, cosmologically speaking.
All right, well, bringing this weave back to go on to the Rosicrucianism thing, we were on like 20 minutes in because you said you had access to like, I don't know what it was called, but like their libraries or whatever and all that.
Yeah.
So you had explained the mystic idea of what Rosicrucianism is, but like when did you have access to these places again, and what were you specifically trying to research in there?
Well, my earliest exposure to the Rosicrucians would be earlier on. I remember in like comic books and books, there would be ads, thoughts have wings, you know, learn about the Rosicrucians, write to the Rosicrucians to receive monographs. They had advertisements, right? So they're always in the back of my head. And I've always been interested with secret societies, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Golden Dawn, the OTO. What are these secrets in these secret societies? I got into the whole, you know, before the internet, conspiracy theories, you know, secret societies, the Illuminati, long before 2012, you know, or in like mid 90s or late 90s, these were conversations we used to rap about this stuff.
Did any of that emanate from your exposure to the music industry itself?
Being in the music industry enhanced it, because as you're in the music industry, you realize a lot of these themes tie in. Oh, Jay-Z's down with the Illuminati. Is this true? You know, and then I remember having a conversation with one of the artists I signed. He's from Jersey. Are you familiar with Joe Budden?
Of course, Joe Budden.
Yeah, I put out all his albums and all his mixtapes.
Really?
Except his very first album on Def Jam. Everything
he's
after
right over here in Jersey City.
Yeah. Joe knows me.
That's hilarious.
I relaunched Joe's career. And Joe got all this credit. Remember I said we did the first podcast in hip hop?
Yes.
Yeah. The Joe Budden TV show. That was all my idea, to grab a camera and I was on the cutting edge with all of that before it became an industry staple. And we positioned Joe Budden to be like this tech savvy. I still have the video footage of me explaining to Joe what a podcast is in the studio. Joe, you got to do this podcast. It's going to be Joe Budden. He didn't want to do it at first. So I took it to my other artist. Are you familiar with Max B? You remember the song?
I know Max O'Cream.
You follow sports, so you probably remember the song, Ballin'. Remember NBA always used to play Ballin'? It's a Jim Jones song. Anyway, it was ghostwritten by Max B. He was another artist of mine.
Got it.
Kanye West has paid homage to him. Max B inspired Drake, Wiz Khalifa, many of the singing songs. They'll all acknowledge influence with Max B. He's in prison now.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so am I, because I lost $250,000 with him. Anyway.
Oh, it was like fraud?
No. Well, he went to prison for conspiracy and murder linked to him. He didn't commit the murder. He was linked to it. Allegedly. Right. The charges were excessive. They were making an example out of him because he was a rapper, I believe. And anyway, you know, and this was, I had come from the conscious space, but then I started, when I was working with the Buddens and the Max B's, I was trying to do more of the street hip hop, because that's what sells and that's what I could sell. Long story short, I brought the idea to Max B and I said, look, we're going to do Max B TV. We'll follow you around with the camera and we put up, and it blew up. And then everybody started emulating that formula. Then Joe Budden went back and seen how these videos were blowing up on World Star Hip Hop. And I was like, oh, that Joe Budden TV thing. I want to do it. And that's what brought a lot of new life into his career. Because after Def Jam, after his one single, Pump, 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 he fell off.
That's really what he had. That was it.
I got his mixtape music, started making like official mixtapes that we got into stores, his mood music series. I put out his album Padded Room. I came up with the concept. Like,
yeah, he really is. He has been one of the guys to patent a new way of like the second act to your career where it's different, because like you said, his music, he Pump It Up obviously went crazy. I think that was #1 on Billboard.
Hey,
and
Grammy nominated.
Right. Yeah. And so he's a successful artist, but then his popularity in music falls off. And instead of like going the actor route or something some other guys had done before that, like Tupac and Ice Cube and stuff, he goes like the content independent media route. And like, credit to him. It's worked out a lot, but you were there day one.
We were an independent label, and we were emerging as the first digital-only label, digital store. I launched a digital retail store before Amazon Digital was even a thing. And the label was emerging at that time. Again, like we were all over the press. It was like the new hot thing, and we were signing all these rappers, Joe Budden, Max B, PD Crack from Philly, Saigon, I remember Saigon
from fucking
yeah,
Entourage?
I'm the real life turtle.
No.
Saigon was signed to my
guy?
label. Saigon was signed to my label.
No way.
Yeah. So he's Jersey too. Is he Jersey? No, he's New York. He's New York.
Hey.
Anyway,
same area.
Yeah. So Saigon, we signed, and they were beefing at the time. Joe Budden and Saigon had like beef when we signed Saigon to the label.
Yeah.
But it's just funny, the good old days. But yeah, so Saigon, popular from the HBO series Entourage. He was signed to the rapper Turtle's label. A turtle was his manager or whatever in the show.
Turtle.
In real life, Saigon was signed to my label. Yeah, real life turtle.
You're like, I have people come through this studio, maybe one out of every 10, 15 guests, where they're like the Forrest Gump of something. You're one of them. You got a Forrest Gump thing to you where you've just been in all these places like with this guy and that guy, and then you end up here somehow. It's kind of crazy.
It's
very
like a
cool
box
part
of chocolates, man. Yeah, don't even get me started to when I was living with Floyd Mayweather. It's a whole other story.
I mean, now I'm going to get you started. What do you mean you were living with Floyd Mayweather?
It was related to the music industry. So like I had all these people reaching. My company was emerging. It was ahead of its time. It was pioneering in the digital space. For years, I had distributed vinyl records, CDs, cassettes all over the world. I signed many artists. I owned multiple record labels. We did tours. We did everything. I was on the cutting edge of the digital stuff because I started going from Boston to another Dan had mentioned one of my mentors, John Anthony West, who he's claiming that I'm faking my relationship. We should get into that at some point too, because my mentor, John Anthony West.
We're going to make friends out of everyone too.
Yeah.
Dan, we're all going to make friends.
We should. It's all about unity.
Yes.
We're all adults and we can all have opposing opinions. There's no need to insult people or try to tear people down.
Right.
Let's just talk about the subject matter and put up evidence on the table.
Right. We'll come back to John Anthony West, but Floyd Mayweather.
Floyd Mayweather. Oh, I had another mentor in the music space. I was doing everything on my own. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I was building my company. This is early on. And so I found this a guy through marketing stuff. And it turns out that he was with Berklee School of Music. And I hired him to consult me. He became a great mentor of mine before John Anthony West. Everybody say, you need a business plan. If you want to expand, you need a business plan. I didn't know how to write a business plan. I never went to school. So I went to him to get help to formulate my business plan. And he had told me early on, he was like, they call you Anyextee or next because I'm always forward thinking. I'm always thinking ahead.
I was just in the shower last night and I was thinking Anyextee. Oh my God. Because like you spell it differently and I never put two and two together. I'm like, that's what it is. It's the word fucking next written out like whatever the term is, anagram or whatever. That's pretty cool. But go
There's
ahead.
a whole story behind that too. But
we don't want to get off
story
on
for
that.
another day.
Yeah, keep going.
So he was like this mentor. I was always kind of forward thinking in a sense, thinking ahead, but it hit me in my early 20s when he said, this decades ago, he was like, see yourself in the future. See yourself 2 years from now. See yourself 5 years from now. What does it look like? What does the landscape look like? What does everything look like around you? Where's music going? How are you going to see that if you don't know what the future looks like? Start looking at trends and see what direction things are moving in. Look back at the past to determine the trajectory of your future. And then put yourself there so that it's so crystal clear in your mind It's like you're already living in that space. And that's what I started to do. And I could see that physical music was starting to slow down and shit. Nobody's buying vinyl records anymore except the purest hip hop heads, DJs and turntablists, and CDs. Downloading is starting to become a thing. I could see that things were going to transition. I was way ahead of my time, literally like 10 years with the music industry and the digital convergence that took place. So I would start traveling. He was like, there's a lot of tech conferences in California. So I'd start going to these tech conferences. I would fly from Boston, take the money I was making for my business, fly out to California. Never been to California. Just went out there, started going to these conferences. And it's in the tech space, and everybody's talking about the future of tech. Then I started seeing a void that I could fill. And I was like, I can merge music with tech, what these guys are saying and the directions going in. I started building relationships and so forth. And long story short, I adopted that mentality and started seeing myself as doing something ahead of its time. And I started this company. And the company started catching on in the music industry. The press releases started going out.
What was the name of the company?
Amalgam Digital.
Okay, I like that.
I also had Amalgam Entertainment, which was the parroting company, distribution company. Yeah, Amalgam, it's loosely connected to alchemy. I've always had an interest in alchemy, and I chose it's always A. Anyextee, Amalgam Digital, Adept Initiates, Adept Expedition. Why A, Julian? Because A is always, there's another
First
one.
letter.
First letter at the top of any directory, And so all of this stuff, my mentor was like, that's great, always pick an A, so you'll always be at the beginning.
That's right.
So I had this emerging company, and then we started signing all these artists, either up and coming artists or getting artists that were struggling with major labels, had fallen off a major label and weren't really doing much, and then making them, all the rage on the internet. The media started calling us a powerhouse. Meanwhile, I just one guy, a couple of his friends working out of my basement, then an attic in my house. It got really crazy. I had because my house was also my warehouse, so I'd have pallets, skids, boxes of records and CDs dropped off in my residential neighborhood. All my neighbors were like, what is going on with this guy? These big trucks would come in, 16-wheeler trucks, and drop off entire pallets, to the point where the girlfriend I was with at the time left me because she's like, I can't take this anymore. My whole house was just filled with boxes. And then eventually we moved out, and I had a state-of-the-art studio. I had an office in Boston. In fact, right where the Boston bombing took place, my office was right there. I had another office in East Boston, and then I grew out of the house. I had multiple employees and interns and stuff. And the company's growing, and the press is all over it. And we were really hot in independent hip hop, and we started catching waves to the point where all 4 major labels have brought me in as a consultant and paid me to do consulting for them. They were busting dinosaur moves. They were too rigid and had to deal with bureaucracy and all. Where I had a lot of flexibility as an independent to do things that others weren't necessarily hip to yet on the internet. And so all my digital strategies early on, again, they were noted in Billboard, Rolling Stone. Everyone could see that we were the future of music. And so I started getting phone calls and hooking up with people. I had Wyclef Jean from the Fugees interested in my company, maybe buying out the company at one point. Floyd Mayweather. We get the call out of nowhere.
Money Floyd.
Yeah, money Mayweather. In fact, I say that in the video with him. You probably pull it up if you want.
There's a video of you and Floyd.
Go to. It's me behind the camera. You hear my Boston accent. Go to YouTube, and if you can, Alessi.
Yeah.
Alessi.
Alessi's kind of badass, though. Not gonna lie. That's like close to that Khaleesi guy. We might need to make a name change there, Alessi. Alessi sounds like you're about to murk motherfuckers. Yeah, I don't know. We'll talk about that afterwards. But there's a YouTube. Where can we find it?
Go up to YouTube. Just put in Amalgam Digital Floyd Mayweather.
Okay. This isn't gonna get copyrighted, right?
It's mine. I own it.
Oh, it's
so
yours.
I'm not gonna.
Okay.
And I'm not big on ownership mentality, so I don't care. Take my content.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've never copyright striked anything. Maybe I should do that.
Oh, that's when I crashed the Sundance Film Festival on Camelback.
Okay. Go down to at the end of that, type in Mayweather. Type in Mayweather.
Yeah.
Also, something's happening over there.
Yeah, you probably take out Anyextee because I'm not in the title of Anyextee on this. Just Amalgam Digital Floyd Mayweather.
Also, Alessi side point. Did one of those thumbnails win?
Put in Floyd.
Yeah,
there you go. There you go. Go to the second one.
This is you.
No, second one down.
Second one.
He's wearing my company. The T-shirt he's wearing is my company.
He's gonna put the mic up. All right, can you turn that volume up on the YouTube, Alessi? Thank you.
So what's up? Coming to you live We're in the ATL. We're about to do the Lil Wayne tour, the Keisha Cole's tour, and the T-Pain tour. Gin Class Heroes, but we saving the best for last, which is my man, Frank Billionaire. We got product. Hold on, you guys wait right there. I'll be right back. I'm going to show you the product we got. You can go to our website, www.amalgamdigital.com. Wait right there. I'll be right back.
That's you.
He's wearing the shirt. That's my record label
And
logo
this is you
t-shirt.
on the.
This is me holding the camera.
We got photos you can buy. You keep your rap. You keep your rap music in these photos. We got everything. Whatever you want to buy. We got t-shirts. We got products. We selling it. You can model it. Whatever you want to do. Hold on. I'll be right back. We got more products.
Did you give him a script for this?
No, this is all. He just did this
Say,
off the cuff
50
on
said
his
he
own.
can't read.
All types of CDs. We got CDs. Yeah, there you go.
Joe Budden.
CDs.
He's holding the Joe Budden CD.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Once again, the website www.amalgamdigital.com.
Oh, he can read. There it
That's
is.
what it is. It's your man
50's
Floyd,
lying.
brother.
All right, that's good.
50 Rich Records, man.
That's good. So he can read. Remember 50 was like,
I love 50.
He's like, I'll challenge you to read one page of Harry. I can't say the full thing because there's a racial context in there, but I'll challenge you to read one page of Harry Potter. You know what? And they're like, oh, Floyd can't read. We just watched him read on camera, people. He can read. But anyway, this is him pumping all your shit.
It's interesting you say 50. Little known fact is 50's first independent CD that was in stores. It was
You.
Let me tell you a quick story, right? A side story. I remember sitting. It was just a few of my friends. We're all sales force, and we're all selling music. I was doing sales at the time, so we'd call up stores, independent stores, mom and pops, Amoeba in California. We had stores here in Jersey. And what you do back then, it was all done on a fax. You have a fax machine back then, and you would have the item, its description, the price, and a catalog of items, and you fax all these stores, and they put an order together for your product. And we were selling a lot of independent stuff, so it's stuff you probably haven't heard of. We were focused on the independent space. And I remember calling stores trying to sell this rapper from New York that was an incredible, he's appearing on mixtapes. And I'm like, you have to get this CD into your store. It's the new album by this rapper. He's about to blow up, blah, blah, blah. Literally getting put on hold, calling like Amoeba in California. And then, trying to talk to each store would have a buyer of music. And they'd be like, yeah, sure, hold on. They put you on hold and you're sitting there, you're losing time, you're trying to make sales. Nobody was taking it serious. I'm getting hung up on So we end up getting the CD to Eminem's lawyer, Theo Sotomayor, and we knew Eminem because I used to distribute vinyl records for Mock Kemp, the guy that put Eminem out originally in like 1996, 97, before Eminem blew up. We distribute his vinyl records. So we get the CD to Eminem's lawyer. He gives it to Eminem. He's writing the Slim Shady show. He doesn't have time to look at it. He's like, I'll look at it when I get a chance. Ends up listening to it and loves 50 Cent, decides he's going to put him in his forthcoming film, 8 Mile, and 50's going to have several songs on the soundtrack. We take that, we put that in the description of the fax. Soon to be, in 8 Mile, about to be signed by Eminem for a major label, boom, the thing starts selling like crazy. It was 50 Cent. I was selling a 50 Cent's first independent CD in stores. When Eminem announced signing 50 Cent, the only CD album, a 50 Cent mixtape album that you could find in Best Buy was Guess Who's Back on Full Clip Records, which was the CD that it was me and like 5 of my friends selling that CD.
There was one time that this guy, I definitely am not going to name drop here, but there's one very random guy I met through my uncle years and years and years ago. Kept in touch with him. Awesome dude, really high up dude in the music industry. But he's one of the greatest all time at talent evaluation and finding guys. Like if I gave you the list of people he discovered, your fucking head would spin. But I asked him one time if he had a day where, because the way they obviously used to do it, and it's similar now, but just different medium, is, you'd have all these cassette tapes and you'd go through a whole library of them and listen, and maybe, one you listen to that week out of fucking 1,200 is someone who could be something. But I said, do you remember if there was like a day where you realize you had the ear, where you could know in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, turn something on, you knew yes or no? And he said yes. And he said it was a very powerful moment. So with someone like you who's been around so much talent and obviously was like a real student of the game with music and has seen some of the greats come up where, you just talked about 50 Cent, you're putting out like his first album before anyone knows who Curtis Jackson is. Like, did you have the ear where you knew? Like, doesn't mean every time they made it, because there's a lot of bullshit in the music industry, as we well know. But like, you knew, like, Yes or no, can or can't?
Yes, Julian, I was a prodigy. No, I'm lying. The truth is, I would love to say yes, but I would be remiss if I didn't give credit to all the talented people around me. One of my partners, Joe, discovered one of our biggest rappers, and often by this point, I was already becoming somewhat I'm getting older. I'm becoming somewhat. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. That was the hip hop I loved. The street stuff wasn't so much. What I was into. And so a lot of times I relied on the people I was working with, my employees and my interns and my friends to let me know, what they think was hot, what they think was, and then I'd analyze it. I would say this though, I can see star quality, star potential.
What do you look for in star potential?
You just know. So for example, with Max B, he would have been a star. I'd probably be retired, sitting on an island somewhere, drinking little pink drinks with an umbrella if Max B didn't go to prison. Right. I would have got a multi-million-dollar deal from a record label because I had him in the contract for management. He was signed to the label. We would have upstreamed him to a major. So many major icons, are influenced by him. When he walked into a room, I didn't even have to hear his music. When he walked into a room, he lit up the room and he gave equal attention to everyone in the room. So it doesn't matter if you're the shy, socially awkward person. He went around and made everyone feel spectacular. Everyone just loved this guy. He was funny. He was enthusiastic. His personality, he had star quality. Everything gravitationally rotated around the star. So how do you know when everything is rotating around something? When something is that magnetic, it can pull you in, and so I could see star quality, but then when you hear his music, you're just like, whoa, this is something different. This is incredible. And so, yeah, in a sense, I was basically putting out stuff that I liked. I was finding older rappers and reissuing them. Another one from Jersey, sure you know Naughty by Nature is, right?
Of course.
Tretch, OPP.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I used to distribute the Naughty by Nature the CD, putting it in the stores, and I was going to sign Tretch to his debut solo album, Geology. I drove all the way from Boston to Jersey. Tretch had me in his living room sitting there. Before I signed Joe Budden, I was explaining the future of music and how everything was going to be digital and how my company Amalgam Digital was going to change the landscape of music. Tretch was blown away. Right then and there, he was down. The problem is when his lawyer got involved, it never came into fruition and the deal went south. But the whole point is I've always been I've liked putting out what I liked. I loved Tretch. I thought he was an incredible lyricist. With OPP and Hip Hop Hooray, all that stuff. And so it was exciting for me to put out or try to put out albums of artists that I grew up on. And then also to try to develop new ones. But yeah, I'm not going to say that I was the guru who could instantly recognize talent. I will say that I'm like a hip hop scholar in a sense. And I know music and I know what I like. And I just go off, what I like naturally and also when I'm being informed and I make conscious decisions. I use discernment. And then when there's a knowing. When you know. It's not always an exact science, because you try to replicate it. We've brought up new artists and we try to replicate it and you can't. Some people just have it. They have that it factor. There's something about them that distinguishes them from all of their contemporaries and colleagues.
It's the way they make you feel. Like you describe Max B going around and being magnetic and everyone's kind of gravitating towards him. Some people are like that. Other people, there's just the thing, there's the thing about them where you're like, and it exists across gender. For whatever reason, you're like, I can't take my eyes, and in the case of music, also ears, off of what this person is doing and saying or performing or whatever. Like, there's just something there, the way that they work a room, however they do it. And sometimes it's like, that's a crazy thing. It can be the opposite. It can be someone who is not magnetic. They're actually like very insulated and not, not extroverted or whatever, but there's just something about them where you're like, they're mysterious. You want to know more. And there's something magnetic about that too, for sure.
And there's a whole science with that goes into marketing, right? Mystery creates attraction.
100%.
Simple formula.
Yeah.
We as humans want to know what we don't know. We want what we don't have. You want the girl, you get in a relationship with the girl, then you don't want that anymore, or vice versa, or we think we never had money, we think we want money, and then when we have all the money in the world and we use it in the wrong way, and then we realize money isn't everything.
That's right.
There's things that are much deeper than money. As I've learned, money isn't everything, and so Yeah, and when we talk about star quality, Floyd Mayweather is a classic example. He is a star. But before the boxing and the incredible physique and skill level, his personality, the guy lights up a room. Like what you seen in that video, no, that was Floyd in the moment. I was like, Floyd, I got to do something for Amalgam Digital. He's like, throw the camera on, baby, let's go. He's grabbing it. He puts the shirt on right away. He's wearing my company shirt. You hear me in the beginning of the video. I'm like, Money Mayweather. You can hear the Boston accent. He throws everything on and he just starts doing everything. I didn't pay him for it. I didn't ask for it. We did have a relationship. He was interested in having me come out to work.
You lived with him, you were saying?
He was interested. We get the phone call. Hey, Floyd wants to work with you guys. Floyd was interested. What we're told is that Floyd was in the beginning is that Floyd was interested in buying out Amalgam Digital, buying the company, because he had an artist, Freck Billionaire, and we were blowing up and we were doing the digital stuff and it was new. It was innovative at the time. So Floyd had an interest in the brand. And then I think what he wanted to do is have me go work for his filthy rich. He had a vanity record label, but he didn't really have music industry people running it. So he wanted somebody who was up and coming and had vision, a pioneer, to come in and do that. So we went to work with him for a while. I was in my office in Boston and they were like, Floyd's on the phone. And he wanted us to help with his artist. That was his main thing. Freck Billionaire was his artist. He's from Philly. And his vanity record label is Filthy Rich Records. And I remember going with them, traveling. There'd be nights we'd go in the club with Floyd. He'd bring a brick of cash. I'm talking $100,000, $10,000. And just he'd drop 10K like nothing in the club. And everybody scrambles. He'd make it rain. You know,
Money Mayweather,
everybody would run and pick up the money. And it was all a promotional effort for his artist. And then he did that big tour, the one he was talking about in the video with Keisha Cole's. It was Drake's first big U.S. tour. Nobody really knew who Drake was yet, aside from his acting career. And I was there. I was front row center.
He was great on Degrassi.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
I remember the old Degrassi before Drake. I never watched any of those.
He did get shot on Degrassi, so you can't say he's a studio gangster.
Yeah. Yeah.
He got shot.
Yeah. He did. I remember seeing that episode. I never watched that because it was like after my time. I just remember hearing about it. Yeah. Not my thing. Not my thing, Julian. But yeah, you know, and so I literally went to Vegas and we stayed with Floyd for a while and I did the whole tour. We also toured the US with Floyd, and Floyd is an incredible individual. I got to the point though where I realized my company was emerging and I saw big potential and I didn't want to just sell out cheap, and I didn't entirely trust Floyd. I felt like I'd be killing my baby if we did do something with Floyd like that.
Why?
Floyd is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Floyd is unpredictable. I remember just some instances, you know, like I had my intern with me one time and we were behind stage in the arena and we were going with Floyd and his entourage, and Floyd's like, yeah, turn the cameras on, run. So I'm telling the intern, put the camera on, film everything. You know, Floyd tells me and I tell them. And then when we get there, security at the arena is like, absolutely no cameras, shut this off. You know, so Floyd turns around and says, shut the cameras off. And he like yelled, he got like kind of aggressive and it scared my intern. And that was the first thing. And I remember one time he turned around so quick, the kid thought that like Floyd was going to hit him. And so he's just so fast and like very impulsive.
Yeah.
It made me feel uneasy about, you know, any like doing something like that with him.
I understand. Yeah.
But what I did gain, on a positive side, what I took away from Floyd is the mindset of a champion. What I've come to learn with Floyd is that he is so strongly convinced, convicted that he's unbeatable. Floyd believes he's untouchable at that time, at least. And for me, I realized there's such a power in that conviction. Absolutely. That if you can believe in yourself that much, if you know in your heart of hearts, if you visualize it and see it, you can be it.
And also, and this has to be said, and it needs to be said about Floyd, and we're talking about him as a boxer right now. Dude worked his ass off.
He did.
That motherfucker put the time in, and he's the greatest defensive fighter I've ever seen. I've never, ever seen a guy in a ring who is more untouchable than him. Getting to him is, I mean, you have a better chance of fucking breaking into the palace in North Korea than getting to that fucking guy. And that's from hours and hours and days and weeks and weeks and months and years and years and years and years of fucking grinding like a dog and working. You know, like people get upset at him for some of the fights because they're boring. And I'm like, as someone who loves boxing, I watch it. I'm not bored at all because I'm like, dude, this guy, his fucking footwork, his hand movement on defensive position. It's like, woo! you know, and I got a lot of respect for that. But you're absolutely right. There is something to be said for the mentality. Like, I've listened to videos before where he's talking to himself while he's training. He's like, I'm a king, I'm God, no one can stop me. I'm the king, I'm the man on top of it. He'll just say it over it for hours and hours and hours. Training affirmations, and
conditioning
it's like,
himself.
It
to
means something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you're like living with Floyd. You've been around the block doing all this stuff, and so you still own that company, by the way?
No, all that's gone. I far removed myself from the music industry.
But you still own the YouTube channel.
No, I don't. We don't have access to. So there was a whole. No, actually, I do still have access to YouTube. Nothing's on it. It's defunct.
Right.
It's part of the record label. It's defunct. So yeah. So actually, yeah. How's the YouTube thing work? I don't know. Anyway, I'm so disconnected from all the music stuff. Around 2012, I left all of that behind. Right.
Was there a moment that caused that?
There were a lot of moments that caused that. There were a lot of big financial issues. Like I said, we invested $250,000 into Max B, and then he went to prison. There was the big fallout with Joe Budden. Joe Budden in the game basically ripped me off for $80,000. And Joe Budden admits this on his podcast in the last couple of years.
He admits that he ripped you off for $80K.
Yeah, he talked about it on his podcast. He talks.
You want to go over there and pay him a visit?
Let's go pay him a visit.
All right, I got a Louisville downstairs.
I would love to have Joe in the ring. I would train to have Joe. I would go, I would get back and train if me and Joe could finally square. Now, ultimately, honestly, I'll in full disclosure, Julian, I don't think violence is a good resolve for anything.
I agree with you.
I think I have appreciation for the sport, gentlemen squaring off. I have appreciation for that. But, I don't think in terms of violence is a great physical resolve. But if it comes to that, then it should be done, in a proper setting like boxing.
I feel like Joe might give you your $80K, though, today. We go talk with him. You know what I mean?
Let's go talk to him.
Let's go talk to him.
We'll get in the ring if Joe wants it.
It doesn't need to be in a ring. We go down, have a drink.
Yeah.
Seems like a nice guy.
We can rap battle too if he wants, whatever he wants.
Oh, you rap battle with him.
That's funny. Yeah, so I moved away from the music industry. Ultimately, I got so disenfranchised that I felt like I was becoming someone that I wasn't, chasing money. And I was always interested in this other stuff, ancient civilizations and, understanding who we are as a people, the deeper aspects. So then I started, use the last of my money to start traveling the world. I did a lot of philanthropy in the end. I started giving back. I realized, man, I made all this money, but I want to give back. I started investing in not even investing, but giving money to small businesses, people like young entrepreneurs. I want to help them out. And then I used my last pennies literally to travel the world. I went on this soul journey. So you're talking about, was there a defining point? It was at this time where I wanted to pursue my penchant for exploring ancient civilizations and the world's mystery traditions. So I started traveling around the world, and that's when I started taking this stuff more serious. I'd always been into it, but that's when I started documenting, reading, researching, and so forth.
When did you develop a relationship with John Anthony West? How did that come about? Yeah,
that's a good question. And that speaks to what Dunking Dan was trying to call me out on Twitter, suggesting that it's staged, that I didn't start calling John Anthony West my mentor until after he passed, until after he transitioned. However, the evidence is there. He says, nowhere did I do that. You could go on my YouTube channel and see my old podcast with John 2 years before he passed, where I used to have a podcast, and my first guest was John Anthony West, and I'm literally talking to him, calling him my mentor. So how did it start? So when I transitioned out of the music industry.
You got to be careful with that word transition these days,
Why?
It could mean a few different things.
It's death.
Could mean death, could mean you're changing your gender. You never know.
Yeah. Well, for transition for me, death, right, in the esoteric tradition, death isn't an ending. It's a transition.
To where?
To the next cycle, to the next...
What's the next cycle?
The afterlife.
Yeah, but what is it?
Beats the fuck out of me. I haven't been there yet.
That's a great answer.
But what I can tell you is that we have all these texts, all these ancient traditions. And I think it's important to look at them and try to understand the ontology and the view that, the perspective that these people have taken on, because especially when, me as an esoteric researcher, I like to look at things through an esoteric lens, right? That is the lens of the Western esoteric tradition. The word esoteric, by the way, the etymology of the word goes back to the Greek, eso, which means inner, the inner aspect of things, and teriko, Esoteria, which meant festival. It was at the festivals where secrets were communicated. What secrets? These are the secrets preserved in so-called secret societies, societies with secrets. These are universal principles. And so they were communicated at the festivals, through different plays or mystery dramas. They were communicated through esoteric symbolism, through gestures, through positioning, through colors, through archetypes. And they were intended to teach lessons, right? And if we can start looking at things in that way, trying to understand more about the ancient world, I look at indigenous traditions, and it radically differs from, how we view things today in the Western world, right? This whole allure to the ancient mindset. We're attracted to Egypt, like we were saying earlier. I think it's the consciousness of the people who built these structures that attract us to Egypt, because it exposes a tension in our modern society, where a tension between scientific method, rational thought, divisive thinking, scientific method, and something that can bring us closer to spiritual realities. Science, spirituality, materialism, spiritual world. A lot of cases, the spiritual world gets dismissed as pseudoscience because we can't see it. Just because science can't see it to measure it and perform scientific approach doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You yourself acknowledge that you believe there's a soul and a spirit. Prove it. Measure it. Right. Show me. How can science prove it? But yet you're so convinced. And Wes is incredible at, he's a historical researcher, and he believes in his religion. But, so clearly he has some sense of spirituality.
Oh, Wes Huff.
Wes Huff, we've had recently, we're talking before. Yeah. So, but you can't necessarily prove a soul or a spirit, and you can't prove what you can't see. You can't necessarily prove the unseen immaterial world, which the ancients seem to have an affinity for, as well as the afterlife. And so what I'm saying is that a lot of people look at death as the end. It motivates many of us. Most of us unconsciously are motivated by one thing, fear, and specifically our fear of death. And that is taking care of the 5 basic human needs: food, clothing, medicine, shelter. Every morning you put clothes on. You don't want to be embarrassed. You want to go out there and fit in society. You're doing all of this. You're manipulating, in a sense. You're doing all of this stuff. You're trying to survive. You're trying to make money because if you don't make money and you don't survive, you don't have a shelter. You don't have a shelter. You can't get clothing. You can't, and ultimately you can get left behind and you can diminish, right? So we operate. This fear-based mentality served us back in the day, when the shaman of the tribe had to go out and, or the warriors went out and, hunted animals and so forth. You had to be cautious, but we've developed a lot. We don't need a lot of the same fear, especially worry. A lot of people waste so much time worrying, but it's almost a useless emotion, because what's going to be is going to be. Que sera, sera. You can't prepare for everything. So worry, fear, when we can overcome and master our fear of death, it's a very powerful thing.
Have you done that?
In a sense, I would say maybe I'm not entirely there, because I still appreciate life and all it has to offer. I love my family and friends and the experience of life, but I'm also equally excited for the afterlife. I want to see what's there. I want to experience what's there, and I could go now. I grew up in the hood, Julian, so I've had a loaded gun pointed to all 4 corners of my head. I know what it's like to feel like, fuck, I'm about to lose my life in an instant. I've jumped out of planes. I've traveled the world. I've been to many places that most people don't get to go. And I've been in situations that have conditioned me. And more so, I've done the work, the deep esoteric work, trying to overcome, your lower animal instincts, work with your shadow self, go within yourself to understand what's motivating you, to rework the things that don't serve you. And so I've also practiced, deprivation tanks, going in float tanks, like Float Lab at Venice Beach in California. You go in the float tank, you close it in, it's complete darkness. Also spending long periods of time in the dark. I practice meditation. So spending long periods of time in the dark, cutting off your senses, sound, sight, smell, trying to reduce all your physical senses. When you're in a float tank, it's almost like it gives you a sense of death. And that is what a lot of initiatic esoteric traditions were doing. They were trying to prepare you for a metaphysical, or using a symbolic or metaphysical death to prepare you for the transition, and it depends what tradition you subscribe to. Some people believe, like Gurdjieff and the Esoteric Fourth Way teachings, that you can leave an impression on your consciousness in this lifetime that will carry over into the next. But if you don't do the work, you're food for the moon.
You had said earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if I missed a detail, but you grew up in like kind of traditional Catholic. Is that what it was?
My parents were Catholics.
Right,
I
so you went to church.
every Sunday and Sunday school until you get to high school, and you're like, fuck this, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right. So was there like a point where you felt like it was just a kneel, stand, just listen to this and not question stuff, where you're like, no, I want to question that because I don't know that this is the only way that definitions work on this stuff.
That happened early on, being around multicultural neighborhoods and different people, different ideas, and then growing through the process, meeting different people in different places to have different perspectives. I was already questioning certain aspects of the world's our religion early on. And then, and that's what led to getting the books on religion. Then you start studying the religions, and then you go to the source. Well, where did this come from? A lot of stuff we look at in Egypt, the principles are all there. It seems like they've, used the principles of Egypt and you go to the Luxor temple, which is the subject of my new book. It's the Annunciation 1,500 years before the Bible. Okay, you have on the wall depicted is the story. You could use the word angel or a spiritual being or a netcher comes down. This divine God or a spiritual energy comes down, tells the virgin that she's going to have tells the woman that she's going to have a virgin birth, a divine birth, a spiritual birth, and has a physical child, which was Mutawiya, mother of Amenhotep III, builder of the Luxor temple. It's all there. It's the Annunciation of when the angel comes down and informs Mary she's going to have a divine birth. It wasn't Joseph who dropped the seed in Mary. It was the divine birth.
Right.
Jesus didn't have a
the
physical
Virgin Mary.
father. Right. That story is told on the wall at the Luxor temple 1,500 years before the Annunciation.
But not as Jesus. It's a different...
Instead of it being Mary, it's Mutawiya. It's his mother, and instead of Jesus, it's Amenhotep III. And that story is told again at another point in Egypt where Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who transgressed from the typical male pharaoh role, had to assert her legitimacy. So she has a scene where she's talking about being a divine pharaoh who's born of divine birth. And this is a tradition that goes all the way back. So these principles were already in Egypt. You find that many of the stories in Christianity, the allegories and the symbolism are representing principles and archetypes that are already inherent in the ancient Egyptian civilization.
Does that necessarily is correlation, causation there? Or to be clear, I think that there are a lot of teachings in the Bible that are symbolic in nature versus actual truth. And then there's other things that historically look like, okay, we have good evidence for that. But even if there were, previous allegories, so to speak, let's not even say they were real, in Egypt or stuff like that 1,500 years before, where they're giving a similar story model, is that in and of itself necessarily proof that therefore the Jesus story is just copied from that? Or does it happen to just be, if true, the same thing or a similar thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Julian. To be fair, we can't say there's an actual direct connection. Oh, they definitely lifted this from this. That'd be very difficult to prove. What we can do is look at the preponderance of evidence. And when we understand, the esoteric symbolism, the nature of the reliefs, and we know what principles that they're perpetuating, and then we see it appear again in Christianity, the same themes, not only Christianity, but other traditions and cultures, the same recurring themes, and for the fact that, Jewish tradition, Judea, it comes out of Egypt. They left, Moses comes out of Egypt. They're connected to the Pharaoh, right? Comes out of Egypt. So those teachings come out of Egypt, which eventually becomes Christianity because Jesus' parents, they were Jewish, right? So there is a connection.
Yes.
There's just not a hard connection. And I would be remiss if I said, you can't establish an act, or it'd be very difficult. I don't know any scholar has. There's tombs written about this. Many scholars have written books trying to establish a connection between the two. I will say that the principles are there. The principles are there, but, it's very likely that these stories are just being retold in different ways.
Got it. So you essentially, though, you were questioning the authority that had just been a definition of your life through the Catholic Church in this way to then look at all the other be it esoteric, mystic, or ancient traditions, just to see where the stories all tied together. But we got off this weave going with John Anthony West and how he was your mentor.
Oh, right.
And you did a podcast with him in 2016, a couple years before he died and everything, but you had been talking with him for some years there.
Before that.
So for people out there who aren't familiar with John Anthony West, can you just give his bio so that people understand the significance of him?
So John Anthony West is really the great granddaddy of the entire alternative history scene right now, if you will, the space, because he opened the door and influenced people like Graham Hancock, Robert Bivol, all the way down the line to the Randall Carlsons, all the way down to the Brian Forsters and the YouTubers, Uncharted X and so forth. They all, in a sense, owe a debt. And many of them, Graham Hancock, every lecture he does, he acknowledges John Anthony West. They all owe a debt to John Anthony West. Why? Because of the water erosion theory, his redating of the Sphinx. In the early mid-1990s, he had the big series on TV on NBC. Charles Heston was the host, Mystery of the Sphinx.
Charlton Heston?
Yeah, Charlton Heston was the host of
Moses.
Yeah, exactly. I had the voice of Moses as the host of this documentary called Mystery of the Sphinx, which aired back in the day on TV, on NBC. And so John Anthony West is known for the water erosion theory. What's this all about? So John Anthony West was a playwright. A lot of people don't realize he was a writer. He knew copywriting. He worked for marketing agencies. He knew how to write. His hook, if you will, to pull people into his Egypt trips, he would say, Egypt is like sex. You can read about it. You can talk about it. You can watch videos, but there's nothing like experiencing it. You have to actually go there to experience it.
That's good.
Yeah. And so, John knew how to write. He knew that everybody is interested in sex. That's going to catch your attention. It's the AIDA formula, AIDA, attention, interest, desire, attraction. It's a common marketing formula, which John would be familiar with as a copywriter, playwright. He wrote several books, but some of his early work into like the more esoteric ancient civilization stuff started with, he wrote a book on called A Case for Astrology. Astrology is considered a pseudoscience. Do you believe in astrology at all?
I don't believe or disbelieve. The girls talk about the horoscopes, and I say, which one is that again? You know?
Right. The horoscopes, which is such it's so much deeper, right? Because the horoscopes, you're going to look at the month you're born. If you're May, you're a Taurus. Real astrology is so much more depth to it. You got to know your ascending sign. It has to do with the time it's a snapshot of the sky at the time you were born. So like you might know the month you were born in, but do you know your ascending sign? It has to do with the time you were born and where your location. And all of these things will be able to determine certain behavioral patterns, which it's really powerful stuff. For a long time, and it's still technically considered pseudoscience, but it's making its way back to the mainstream. I just recently finished a graduate level course. I paid Pacifica University to take this course in applied archetypal astrology.
Applied archetypal astrology.
You're borrowing from the work of Carl Jung on archetypes and applying it to astrology. And it was with a lot of psychologists and these are graduates, PhDs and stuff in here. And you're using archetypes with astrology to develop a better, deeper understanding. Anyway, long story short, John is writing a book to make a case for astrology. He explores the origins and the roots and gets into its impact on humanity, and that he believes there's something to it. I think it's one of those few things that I think there is something more to it, that it may not necessarily entirely be a pseudoscience. When you get into it and you practice it, it can reveal some pretty powerful stuff about yourself and conditions. Anyway, in that process, he's been interested in esoteric traditions. So he was interested in the work of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, a Russian mystic, Russian mystic, who started the Fourth Way teachings. John was a student. He was in a Fourth Way group. And in that group, he was introduced to the work of R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, a French hermeticist. Yeah. A French hermeticist, alchemist, esotericist, and in a sense, an independent Egyptologist, not an academically trained PhD, but he studied Egyptology. Schwaller had moved to Egypt, lived in Egypt for over 12 years with his wife and his stepdaughter. Same situation as me in a sense, moving to Egypt and living there with the family. And he studied specifically the Luxor temple. And he developed this body of work known as the symbolist interpretation of Luxor temple. So in his view, the temple is not merely, an architectural structure, but it's more than that. It's didactic architecture. It is intended to teach a lesson. It's through mystic initiation. You're learning about universal principles, cosmological principles in the nature of man. And so John was studying all of that stuff. And in that process, reading Schwaller's work, Schwaller wrote this extensive work making a case for this stuff. And Schwaller believed that, and that's the other thing, we all owe a debt to John Anthony West. But before John Anthony West, really, Schwaller is the great-great-granddaddy of them all. Because he was the one that, after the end of a long chapter, which in this body of work, he's looking at Greco-Roman accounts, Greeks and Romans, because they left the best accounts of the ancient world. And so he was looking at all of this stuff to try to piece back dates to determine that the ancient Egyptian civilization is older than the Egyptologists are telling us it is. And these are the documents that John works from, the Palermo stone and the Turin papyrus. But at the end of, and he did an incredible detail, John believed it was one of the best works of scholarship in our century. Schwaller had all the information in there, but none of it's science. In a courtroom, it's all hearsay.
Why?
Because there's no scientific method. It's just people saying stuff. It's the Greeks saying that this had happened, and the Romans saying they viewed this.
Oral
and,
history.
Oral history and textual history, but at the end of the day, John realized it wasn't science, but there was something Schwaller said that led to an epiphany for John. At the end of the chapter, Schwaller recognizes that the Sphinx has aquatic water erosion on the body of the Sphinx.
How did he discover that?
That's an excellent question, Julian.
Thank you.
One that most people in this space don't ask. And that's going to lead to an excellent answer, one that nobody in this space has referenced before.
Please.
St. Yves d'Alvestre, or it's actually, it's Alexander Marquis St. Yves d'Alvestre. Let's just stick to St. Yves because it's easy.
Yeah.
He's an esotericist. He was known for synarchy, which was a philosophy on using esoteric principles for society. And he had the archaeometers, this esoteric instrument. And he really inspired a lot of the Western esoteric tradition, Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and everything that came out of that. Rudolf Steiner and also the traditional Martinist order, Uncus Papus, and all of these people, right down the line to the Rosicrucians, Freemasons. St. Yves, before Schwaller, believed that the Sphinx was much older than the Egyptologists think. And problem with him is he thinks it goes back to like 1200 BC. He believes it was the product of Atlantean refugees after Atlantis that they built the pyramids, right? Yeah. So the thing is, when we say Atlantis in esoteric tradition, there's different interpretations depending on your degree of understanding and consciousness.
Depending on the degree of understanding and consciousness?
Yeah.
All right, in English.
Okay, let's break out for a minute and talk about esoteric symbolism to best understand this.
God, this is so good. I need a joint. Go ahead.
We can smoke one after this. I'm trying to quit, but joint break, please. So you have, let's take images, for example, imagery. You have an elephant and you have a man with a beard and a pinstripe suit and a top hat. What does it mean?
Circus? That's what my visual would go to.
Yeah. And if I were to go down the street to the McDonald's and ask the guy behind the counter flipping burgers, what is this and what is this? He might look at the image and say, oh, well, it's an elephant and it's a guy with a top hat and a pinstripe suit, But if you take those same images and the whole scene, the context, to a political science major at Harvard, you're going to get a different answer.
Oh, right, because the elephant is...
The elephant... or the bear, say the bear, the Russian, right, or the Russian bear, right? You have the bear, which is a symbol of Russia. You have the pinstripe suit man, Uncle Sam, symbol of America.
Interpretation of symbols, I got you.
Interpretation of symbols can have many meanings.
Yes.
And deeper layers of meaning. It's like peeling back the onion,
Yes.
right? So there's the surface.
You're good.
There's the surface interpretation of symbols. And then there's often multiple or deeper meanings. And you may not arrive at those meanings unless you've gone through the degrees of consciousness. Unless you've gone through the various degrees to acquire the appropriate context for what it may mean. Lawyers, speak with legalese. It's like a secret language. This is why you hire a lawyer, so that they can write your cease and desist letters, or they write whatever letter using specific language that the commoners, the uninitiated, like you and I, may read and wouldn't understand the implications of this specific word. And I learned this in the music industry, because if that one, I was surrounded by lawyers, and if this one word is off, you don't dot all your I's and cross all your T's, your contract is blown.
Yep.
You know, because it's almost like a secret, but they go through, you know, degrees in the educational system to earn a PhD, to learn. So at the front end, you might not understand it. At the back end, you have a whole new meaning of what the word, a word in that language would mean. Same thing with doctors. You're going to read medical journals. You're going to get lost in it. Same thing with Egyptologists. You might not get all the technical jargon in the Egyptological journals. That's why you go to school to become an Egyptologist, to learn the language, to learn the technique, to get equipped. And it takes years to do this. A lot of these alternative YouTubers pop up and they're like, oh, why aren't the Egyptologists doing this or saying this? And it's because they have to follow a certain protocol. They've gone through a process to acquire their understanding. Same thing applies with esoteric traditions, where the initiated is going to go through degrees. You know, we're talking about death. You know, some initiations, there's a living resurrection ritual where you go inside of a sarcophagus for 3 days and the priests are doing incantations and stuff. And then you come out and it was like you had a death. You're twice born. You had a metaphorical, or it's not a physical death, but it was a transition. In the esoteric tradition, we don't say death, we say transition, because death is not an ending, it's a transition. And the ancient Egyptians understood this transition well, as it was expressed by the sun. The sun would go to set in the west. It rises in the east, comes up over on the horizon, the Horus horizon, sets in the west, where it goes to die every day. They would observe it. Oh, the birth of the sun, there's Ra, and then it goes to die. It gets swallowed into the underworld. This ties into the afterlife.
Karma or not karma. What's the...
Resurrection, reincarnation.
No, reincarnation, that's it. Yeah.
So, and these doctrines were, you know, in ancient Egypt. So you would have the sun swallowed by the underworld, and it goes into this unseen immaterial world, and every day it would be born again. Ancient Egyptians, every single day they died. You live to die and die to live again, 360 degrees. That's how you comprehend. The sun rises, it dies. There's a cycle, a daily cycle. Right. So, and they realize that everything goes in cycles. There's cosmological cycles. There's internal cycles. Cosmos being the macrocosm, us being the microcosm of that macrocosm. So we can establish that, you know, that which is above is like that which is below. And if you understand what's above, you can understand what's below. Or taking an esoteric lens, you know, that which is without is within, and that which is within is without, because esoteric is about going within. So if you understand, if man know thyself, if you go inside and understand yourself, or if you understand that you're a microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe, and you understand how the universe works with the music of the spheres, which was a concept by Pythagoras, you know, and you learn how to embody these things. This is what all the esoteric traditions are teaching, right? And to overcome death, because death isn't the ending, which is powerful stuff. Because when you do, I do feel like I've overcome the majority of my fear of death. You might jump scare me at some point, and I might, you know, get startled. But if you were like, look, you're going to die. Yeah, it's going to suck, but I'm ready. I'm ready for the next life.
Well, I didn't want to stop you back when you were talking about that maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, but like, it was interesting how you put it. Your leftover fear of it, and I'm putting that in quotes there, has to do with the things that the people that you'd leave behind here. And there's a fear of not having them. And what does that mean in the afterlife? Do you get with them again? But like, you seem to have a piece of, I'm cool not knowing what I don't know about what happens after, and I'm looking forward to going there. So it's like you've kind of tamed that dragon maybe 75% of the way, but that last 25% is what makes you human.
Yeah, and not only am I looking forward to it, I'm preparing for it. I'm an esotericist, so like I consider myself a mystic in skeptic's clothing, like my mentor before me.
We can throw you out the fifth story window and, you know, get you there.
I'm not saying I can fly.
I'm not either.
but as a mystic in skeptic's clothing, right? I'm going to approach everything with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to look at everything. I'm going to use science. I think science is very valuable. But I'm also operating with the understanding that I'm operating with a limited understanding. Science can't see everything yet. We don't know everything yet. There is more. So there's a case to be made for some stuff. And so as a mystic, I'm going within for answers. I'm not going without. I'm not running to YouTube. I'm not going to the Bright Insight YouTube channel for my answers.
You're not?
No, I'll go to academia first, but ultimately I'll go within. And if it's not right within, it's not going to be right without.
How do you know if it's right within, though?
You know, there's a knowing. It's gnosis. And ultimately, it's not about what's right or wrong. Who gets to determine what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad? Religions. They tell us, oh, Jesus is good, the devil's bad. Well, Jesus, if he is the way, if he's the salvation back to the creator, he's the principle of return to source. There's a source. We come from the source. We're here. We return. It's the same principle in ancient Egypt as Horus. Horus represents the return to source. Horus's opposition in that story is Set, Setian forces, which become Satan, which become the devil. Set is the principle of opposition. So our goal in humanity is to have this experience. According to the ancient mystery schools, the Pythagorean mystery schools, they viewed it as, it's like we're mirrors of the divine. We are extensions of the divine experiencing itself through us in this universe, and we are going to return back to source. But some people believe that in order to do that, you have to prepare. There's a process. The ancient Egyptians had this whole, afterlife carved out for them. They had to go through processes. And like I said, like the fourth way, Gurdjieff teachings, you got to start preparing now to leave an impression on your consciousness with your ka and with your ba, which are terms we don't use anymore. We just have a soul. For the ancient Egyptians, they had 9 different aspects, and the ka and the ba would reunite in the afterlife and come together to form what's known as a ak. And ak is the light. It's the fully realized, illuminated individual.
I understand what you mean when you talk about religions telling us good and bad or this or that and defining things for us. In some cases, it's strictly just based on a belief system or something like that, meaning it's not inherent. Let me explain that. To me, I don't want to say this. When you start to say there's how do we determine what's good and bad, we don't. Like there's things that can't define that for us. To me, when you get it down to brass tacks and just look at the world, remove religion, remove governments, remove spiritual teachings, whatever. There's a lot of gray area for sure, but there's certain things that I think are common sense with what we gotta, what we gotta face in the world. For an example, if you go out, if you leave here right now and you go find a woman on the street and against her consent, have your way with her, that's wrong. I'm willing to sit here and say on the record on this podcast, inherently, if you're looking at good and bad, that's bad. If you went and some dude on the street, you shot him to death for no reason. Perfectly good guy, you didn't know him, you just shot him to death. That's wrong. So don't you think it gets a little weird when we start saying, well, to go within, we can't really know what's right and wrong. Doesn't that take it like a step too far?
One, each situation is going to be nuanced. Right? There's who gets to determine what, that's why we have courts of law and all of this, and it doesn't always end up serving justice. But what I'm saying is in terms of right and wrong, yes, there's a moral compass. You figure out what your moral compass is to determine for yourself. But what I'm talking about is, if you attack that woman on the street improperly or you kill someone, both of those instances are destructive. So to me, it's all energy. You're either going to have positive or negative energy. And negative, that's all negative because it's destructive. It's going to destroy. But destruction is not always evil. Destruction is not always bad. People look at fire. Oh my God, the fire it's a horrible thing. In esoteric traditions, fire is the initiating principle. Because you're going to burn everything down to start anew. The Mesoamerican, the Maya, they would do a slash and burn technique in the fields. They would burn everything down and renew. It was about, fire is the initiating principle. If you get in a tarot, the first tarot card, it has the fire elements and all of that. Fire is in the beginning because it's going to initiate the way for something new. So my point is that everything is energy. It's either positive or negative, or it could be neutral, right? And so when we start determining, well, this is the good guy and this is the bad guy, I feel it's like, I won't say Jesus and Satan because there's probably a lot of sensitive Christians that might be listening. Let's say Horus and Set from the ancient Egyptian tradition. Set is the hero, Horus is the hero, and Set is the bad guy. Why Set the bad guy? Because he killed, he destroyed. Horus's father, Osiris. He dismembered him, cut him up into pieces, and then the mother, Osiris, goes and resurrects him. It's all part of the Egyptian mythology. Set isn't necessarily the bad guy. He's not even a guy. He is a principle. He is a principle is representing opposition. When you get up in the morning and you get your podcast going and then suddenly, you're not getting the right levels or your computer's not opening up, that is set in action. Anything that is opposition is set. So your goal in life, according to esoteric traditions, are to return back to the source. Anything that gets in the way of that, providing opposition, is set in action. But we need set. People are afraid of the devil. I say sit down, have breakfast, and meditate with the devil.
Why?
You need to go through the fire to rise up as the phoenix from the ash.
Oh, so it's this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, maybe I'm misinterpreting, but I always talk about like if the world were a perfect place and there were nothing evil, there wouldn't be a point to it because there would be no feeling of up and down, like accomplishment or whatever. Are you saying something similar here?
In a sense, it's like, how can you truly appreciate love if you haven't gone through the light and dark? How can you appreciate the light if you've always had light? If your whole life has been good and you've been handed everything and everything's good for you, how are you ever going to appreciate that? Versus someone who hasn't had everything, someone who's had to go through struggles and overcome obstacles and work their way through and sustain to get where they're at, they're going to have a different appreciation when that reward comes. And when Julian, Dorey calls them up and invites them to their podcast, they're going to appreciate it because they've gone through the struggle. You know what I mean? To get there. So the point that I'm trying to make with all of this is that we need opposition. Esoteric tradition, recognizes the importance of two complementary aspects, and it's often encoded in architecture. What I mean by that is, in simple terms, you need a male, positive, female, negative, receptive. Male and female must come together to form new life. You need a positive current and a negative current to come together to form electricity. It is through opposition of complementary opposites that the creative principle is manifested. Nothing will be created without some sort of opposition. You need to, in a sense, all of this is your adversary. You need to overcome, you got to make sure the levels are right in order to produce this podcast.
Yes.
Two complementary opposites, male and female, need to come together to form new life. Electricity, opposites need to come together to form new life. Psychologically, if you have an adversary and, conflict is okay. It's good. It doesn't have to end in violence. We're all adults. We can have differing opinions as long as we're respectful of one another.
Right.
We don't need to do the name calling and the trying to tear somebody down with false information. We can have a discussion and arrive at new conclusions. But in order to do this, you have to go through your opposition.
That's right.
John Anthony West, we're talking about mentor, which we haven't got to
You brought the weave back. I didn't have to do it.
I brought the weave for you. John Anthony, one of the most powerful.
You brought him up with, I just want to make sure, you brought him up with like some European guys who were talking about his aquatic whatever on the Sphinx. But
Schwaller.
Yeah, keep going.
All right. In short, John Anthony West, one of the most powerful lessons I learned from John, something that he would teach, is to give your opposition its due. We're sitting here, right? And I can step outside of myself psychologically and create this observing spectator. I can take myself out of myself and analyze a situation. Oh, am I too loud? Am I too excited? You probably do a lot of this on your own. When you're doing a podcast, you have to check your tonality, your pacing. You have to think of questions. Sometimes you have to step out of the environment. This is good when you're in an argument with someone, because if you feel yourself fight or flight response going off, or you're getting angry, you have the power to move. I think of it in terms of a DJ. I used to DJ, so I'd move the crossfader on a mixing board to get more of what I need. And if you can take self-inventory of yourself in the moment, you can see what you need. So by doing that, you gain mastery over the situation. It's the top of the pyramid, right? You're at the bottom of the pyramid. I'm the other side of the bottom of the pyramid triangle. But over here is this objective truth. There's your truth. There's my truth. Then there's the objective truth. That's what I'm trying to get closest to. And the more that I can pull myself out of myself, because I have my own preconceived notions, my own limited understanding, as do you, our own conditioning from our own backgrounds, our own thought process. But if we can pull out of that and put ourselves in a position of our opposition and get a little bit of empathy and try to understand, that's how you work things out. And people are afraid. They're afraid of challenges. People are lazy these days. They don't want to put the work in. They don't want to go through something that bothers them. This is going to be too much work.
Right.
The esoteric tradition is about doing the work, putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, making yourself comfortable with being uncomfortable, so that when the uncomfortable, inconvenient, objective truth smacks you in the face, you're prepared. And that's what initiation's about.
Yeah, and being what you're talking about too, and I think this is so relatable to everything today, being able to put yourself in a position where you can change your opinion when faced with better evidence. That's a lesson. I don't give a fuck what it is, whether it was esotericism that did it or, some fucking guy on a YouTube channel that said you should go do this. But like, we need more of that in our society. Like, I appreciate the guys, and this is what I was saying earlier about Billy Carson. If Billy Carson had come out after the West debate and said, you know what, yeah, he made a few good points. I hadn't thought of it that way. I would have respected him so much, because I would have said, all right, there's so much information here. Maybe there are some things you're wrong about. Every fucking person out there is wrong. But when you come out and you go, no, how dare him? He's trying to stop our movement. And you sue him and all this stupid shit, you make yourself look like an asshole because you are so rigidly backed in your corner of this is my worldview and this is what it is. And in his case, I think it's for financial reasons more than anything.
He's got to protect his investment and his brand.
And it's just so disappointing, because this is how we get somewhere based on the types of conversations you seem to want to have, which is like, all right, let's put it all together and, figure out what's what.
That's what I do with my tours in Egypt. We put all the pieces on the table. We're going to give you the academic, the traditional narrative, and I know it very well, because I studied ancient Egyptian history, the mythology, the language, I know it really well. But in addition to that, I also know the alternative theories really well. And then I have my esoteric perspective. So I try to put all the pieces on the table. When I do my tours, a lot of my competitors do tours with one narrative. Lost technology. We're going to go look for, this is what it must be. I throw all the pieces out there, in a sense, unbiasedly, and let the audience, the crowd, the group, decide for themselves.
Love that.
And I've toured with both sides. I've toured with the alternative side, engineer Christopher Dunn, the Kemet School, John Anthony West, who taught me, and then others that are more on the academic side, Dr. David Miano, a historian.
David Miano.
I think
people were asking, is he alive?
Yeah, he's live. I just led him through Egypt for an Egypt tour.
Someone was asking.
He's famous for debunking online. He does a lot of debunk. He's a historian. He's a general historian and a teacher. He's a great guy.
I got to check him out. But go ahead. Yeah.
And so, and then I've done tours, collaborated tours with other like YouTubers that kind of walk this middle line, like that rely on evidence. Ancient architects, history for granite, history with Kaylee, and so. The whole point is I like to look at the big picture, put all the pieces on the table. Where I see a lot of the alternatives will often cherry pick certain aspects to fit their narrative. I try to put everything out there and try to give as much information as possible and let the people decide. And then if they ask for my opinion, I'll let them know. And a lot of them are often disappointed because people come on my tours expecting John Anthony West narrative, my mentor. We didn't get into it, but John Anthony West is known for his redating the Sphinx.
Yes, and you were talking about it based on aquatic
water erosion. Right. Which I don't agree with his final conclusion. While I respect my mentor and I've learned a tremendous amount from him, I do not share all of his conclusions. I do not think the Sphinx is much, much older than the Egyptologists tell us. I don't think it can be older than 3,500 BCE.
Let's start with this. Let's break down his theory and then let's break down yours. Go.
Okay, so his theory is that the Sphinx is much older than traditional Egyptologists tell us. Why? When he was reading Schwaller de Lubitsch, who was an esotericist who had moved to Egypt, studied the Luxor temple. Schwaller was a prodigy. At age 16, he was lecturing before the Theosophical Society doing a treatise on Pythagorean number mysticism, how numbers correspond to cosmology.
Right.
And he was an esotericist. He had an esoteric background. So he approached Egyptology with this unique esoteric perspective where all the traditional Egyptologists, most of them, they're either Christian or they're strictly into the science. They're not going to pay any attention to the esoteric stuff. It's all woo-woo to them, which is unfortunate. There is a lot of woo-woo. There is a lot of charlatanism. But there's also people that are very serious. And I believe that Schwaller was a serious scholar and had a different understanding that he brought to Egypt. And he interpreted things in a different way. But in that process, at the end of his book, he writes this observation about aquatic water erosion. And what I was saying before that you won't hear anywhere else, it goes before him. He was influenced in a sense, I wouldn't say his mentor, but he was influenced by St. Yves, who we talked about earlier. St. Yves believed the Sphinx goes back to maybe 12,000 years before the actual date, and that it was the product of refugees from Atlantis. However, there was no science to back that up. He was speaking strictly philosophically in a sense. Schwaller started making a case for that. And so Schwaller acknowledges that there's water erosion, but doesn't pay much attention to it. For West, a light bulb went off. Well, if it's water erosion, that's geology. Geology is science. So even though we have all these historical documents and texts that Schwaller's trying to make a case for a much older Egypt, this is science. And if we can put science to it, it can be proven. John was writing his books, and then eventually he was introduced to Dr. Robert Schoch, who is a geologist. John didn't have the credentials. John didn't have the ability to go and present this in the academic space. You know, he'd be ridiculed, and he was ridiculed. But then when he got with Schoch, Schoch has the certified credentials. You know, he's a geologist, paleontologist at Yale. He teaches at Boston University. And when he went with John Anthony West to the Sphinx in the early 90s, and a lot of people credit him today because West has passed, Schoch is still alive. Schoch does a lot of conferences, and people often attribute the whole water erosion theory and hypothesis to Schoch, but it originates with West and even before West.
Yeah, but they both played a role.
They both played a role. Yeah. And so he brings in Schoch, and when they go there, they look at the water erosion, and then Schoch ends up coming back with Thomas Dobeke in the early 90s. Thomas Dobeke brings in, he was a geophysicist, brings in state-of-the-art equipment. They do a seismic refraction survey, like tomography, where they study the ground. Basically, it's based on the exponential kinetics of the stone. In other words, if you cut stone, it's exposed to the light, and then it starts to deteriorate over time. And that deterioration is exponential, but it slows down. It's kinetic. So they use this whole process. From that, they're able to establish different, interpretations, which they did for dating the Sphinx. So there's two key observations. So John's original observation is that, if there's water erosion on the Sphinx, he went and he checked it out, and he's like, sure enough, this Sphinx looks heavily eroded. This limestone sculpture, some 70 feet tall, 270 feet wide, arguably the most spectacular sculpture on Earth, looks heavily eroded. And to understand what's going on here, it'd be important to give a brief lesson on the geology of the Sphinx, Sphinx Geology 101. The Sphinx is composed of 3 separate levels of rock strata. Starting with the head and above is the hardest, and then the majority of the body, which has alternating soft and hard levels of limestone, and then another layer below, which kind of dips through the plateau. And it kind of dips from 2 angles, and it comes from like southwest to the northeast, and it kind of rolls. So it makes it very complex. The simplest way of explaining it, you can think of the Sphinx and the geology of the Sphinx as a layer cake. This becomes important later, of stone. This becomes very important later. So when John looked at it, you could see the body, which is what they refer to as member 2, or the second layer of limestone in the Mokattam Rock Formation at Giza.
The Mokattam Rock Formation.
The Mokattam Rock, that's what it is. People call it a plateau. It's not really a plateau. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. So John observed this erosion. In fact, this story gets retold different ways. I've heard people say others have done. It was John who brought this to a curator at a museum, and he showed them an image of eroded stone, and he put duct tape across the bottom and the top of the image. So you just see the main body of stone. It's heavily eroded. And they're like, oh, it looks like erosion, heavy erosion, water erosion. John rips the duct tape off and reveals the face of the Sphinx. And they're like, oh, this is the Sphinx. John knew that he was onto something, but he didn't have the credentials. So he needed to have Schoch, a geologist, come in and verify it, which he did. John originally thought, and this is what I love about John Anthony West, because if was the last of a dying breed who has transitioned already, because if he was wrong and it could be demonstrated that he was wrong, he would stand correct. And he did, because he originally wrote, he thought it was Nile flooding, because Egypt doesn't see that much rain. The Sphinx is supposed to have been carved from the living bedrock during the period of Khafra, which is the second pyramid in the chain at Giza. You have Khufu, his son Khafra, and then Menkaure. And during the time of Khafra is when the Egyptologists say that they believe the face of the Sphinx is likely Khafra. And so this is around 2500 BCE, okay? And so the problem is that if there's this water erosion, it doesn't really rain like that in Egypt. It hasn't been that wet throughout Egypt. And before that, you have like the Nabatean pluvials, you have the African humid period where there was rain in Egypt. Egypt used to be a savanna. In fact, dozens of times Egypt has gone from desert to savanna. It's transitioned over the years. And when we look at the geology, one thing that's important to keep in mind, some of the erosion we're looking at is millions of years old. In the stone, it's been desert, tree, vegetation, desert, vegetation throughout.
Do we know what
cycles of time.
causes that?
I'm not a geologist. I'm uncertain. Actually, I'd have to dig into more of the geology.
A great answer.
Yeah, I don't have an answer, and I don't want to steer you wrong and pretend I do. A geologist could better explain it than me.
Sure.
I just know over long periods and cycles of time, the way the planet's affected is going to affect the landscape. And like the Nile is shifted. The Nile used to be closer. The Nile's shifted. Anyway, so if you have this water erosion, how could that be possible if Egypt didn't have? That was the whole thing, right? The mystery of Sphinx. How could this be possible if there's no rain? So John thought this might have went back. It survived the Great Flood. When Schoch came, he said, no, it's not Nile flooding. It's precipitation-induced water erosion. He made two observations. One of them was the erosion. On the body of the Sphinx, the core body, which is what Schwaller referred to, the body, not necessarily the head, which is the hardest, and not below, which is covered up with stone masonry today, but the core body, the middle part, is heavily eroded. And you can see where water runoff may have impacted the Sphinx. But more so, the real evidence is in what's known as the Sphinx enclosure. The Sphinx was dug out from a ditch. It's not a statue. It wasn't built. Stone was removed to form a ditch, and then they believe those stones are what made the temples in the front, although there's controversy around that. Maybe not. Anyway, and then they fashioned this sculpture, the statue. So if you want to envision the Sphinx, it's going through several stages. Originally, it would have been what's known as like a yardang, basically an outcropping. Everything would have been level from the neck up. From the neck up is where the people would be walking, the surface level. And it was just a giant piece of stone, outcropping stone. At some point, somebody started to dig down and fashion a trench around it. And then they fashioned the body. And this is another thing. A lot of people talk about, the head of the Sphinx had to be carved down. It had to be a lion previously. Why? Because if you look at the Sphinx, if you want to pull it up on the screen, try to find an aerial view of the Sphinx. So like Giza or Egypt Sphinx aerial view. When you look at the Sphinx, you'll notice that the head appears to be disproportionate to the very long body. Small head, big long body with a rump in the back. Okay, so
the second one right there?
Second one maybe. Well, actually, that's fine. We'll go with that. Well, the one right in the middle. Yeah, so actually, it's hard to tell from here.
The fourth one, you want that one? Right there?
That might be better. How about this? Put in Sphinx head disproportionate, and maybe because there's better images where you can see.
All right, so let's type in Sphinx head disproportionate. Let's see what we get there. Never gets old looking at this. I don't care what angle you look at it from. It's just amazing.
It never gets old going there.
It doesn't get old. All right.
We want. All right. Well. All right. The one far right, second row, far right. No, go back. Well, yeah, that's showing. All right. All right. Right below that to the right.
Right there.
That.
Okay.
So we can see, this isn't the best example, but we can see the head in the front looks really small compared to this long body with the tail that wraps around. So people are like, it couldn't be the real head. It had to be the head of a lion. You can see an example in the middle there. Maybe it was originally a lion. It existed before pharaonic times or early pharaonic times, and then they carved it down into the face of a pharaoh. We're going to settle this and set the record straight right now here on the Julian Dorey podcast.
Let's do it.
The reason why the head of the Sphinx appears to be disproportionate is because if you look at the back of the Sphinx, it's actually not disproportionate to the original concept of the Sphinx. What I mean by that is the Sphinx we see today isn't even your great-great-granddaddy's Sphinx. There's been so many restorations over time. But originally, you have this outcropping of stone. They start to dig a ditch around it, and then eventually they form the body. And then there's been many restorations from the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, all the way up in the Greek and Roman times into modern restorations, where they're adding stone masonry around the Sphinx. Originally, in the back of the Sphinx, right before the hunch, right before the rump, there's what's known as the Great Fissure. It starts on the plateau, it goes through the enclosure wall of the plateau and runs through the back of the Sphinx, right before the hump, right before the butt. There's a big crack that goes through the Sphinx. Originally, that would have been part of the bedrock, and everything forward would have been your original body of the Sphinx. So the reason why people say the head looks too small for the body is because the body we see today has been expanded to accommodate the Great Fissure. And if people actually looked into the Egyptological, it's been expanded. And if people took the time to actually look into the body of Egyptological work, you go to the sources. Mark Lehner, who's an eminent Egyptologist, he's probably the foremost authority besides, say, Zahi Hawass, who's really more of a face for tourism and stuff. Mark Lehner, his office was in between the paws of the Sphinx. He studied it every day, stone by stone. Few of those who know the Sphinx better than Mark Lehner. And he did a whole survey, literally stone by stone, of the Sphinx. And in his dissertation, which is hundreds of pages, I've read it several times, you can find his dissertation online. On page 410 or 408 of his dissertation, somewhere in there, don't quote me, in between 410 and 408, it's either the first or the second paragraph, he references this and talks about how the fissure is expanded in the back. So in other words, you have, it might be hard for the viewers to see here, but let's say this is the bedrock. Here's the Sphinx. And they carve out the body of the Sphinx. And it would have originally looked like, can you pull up Narmer's palette? Narmer palette. Narmer's palette is what defines the Egyptian civilization.
Narmer's, or are you saying Narmer's because you're from Boston?
I'm saying Narmer from Boston. It's
okay.
Narmer. Narmer's palette. He parked the car in the Harvard Yard with Narmer.
Nar, not
yeah. Narmer.
Yeah, first one right there. First one. Yep.
Okay.
Images.
Click on the images right there. Perfect. And then if you can just zoom in or click on the image so it's full screen. This is the front and back of the Narmer palette. And if you look to the left, you'll see an image of Narmer. Catfish chisel. That's what Narmer.
Catfish chisel.
Yeah. That's what Narmer means in ancient Egyptian language. The hieroglyphs are right up above that say catfish, symbol for catfish, and chisel. That's his name, Catfish Chisel.
Got it.
Narmer, also known to the Greeks as Menes. He's the first, not really the first, because it's a really gray area, Dynasty 0, and there were rulers before him. But Narmer is what begins Egyptian civilization as we know it for scholarship. We define ancient Egyptian civilization by a chronological timeline when starts when Narmer unified the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, the North and the West, brought the two lands together. That's the beginning of ancient Egyptian dynastic civilization, which then we have Dynasty 1, 2, 3, all the way up. There is some controversy and it is still disputed about Dynasty 0, and then there's rulers before. It's a very gray area. We don't have a lot of information. In fact, I just came back from Necken, which is a site that we were one of the first public groups to actually bring a tour group to this site. We had to get special permissions. It took me a long time to set up, and thankfully, because I have good relationships from Alexandria to Aswan and with the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt, we were able to get access for Dr. David Miano's tour, and I was able to lead them to Necken. Necken is important because it's one of the oldest ancient Egyptian sites, and it's where they dug the Narmer palette. I literally stood on the mound that they pulled this thing out of. Few eyes ever get to see this, Julian. Most tourists that go to Egypt never see this. In fact, most Egyptians don't even know about it. I asked the local Egyptians, they're like, what and where is Necken?
So you're the plug.
I'm the plug. So we took the group there, and it's a significant site, and this is where they pull Narmer's palette out from, and it's not very well excavated. There's still much more work to be done. And I've had discussions with Egyptologists about this. If we were to do more excavations at Necken, we're probably going to be able to learn more about early and pre-dynastic history. We already know a little bit about pre-dynastic history from the area, like early prototypes, we could say, of Egyptian hieroglyphs, where they would use different glyphic symbols on ivory tags, bone tags, which the language seems to slowly develop or quickly develop from that. Anyway.
Can we pull up Narmer's again? Sorry.
Yeah, so Narmer's palette. We want to take a look at Narmer's palette. It looks like a shield, but it wasn't used as a shield. It was actually used for the makeup for the eyes. There's a circle, and they would put their stuff in there, their paint. All right, so look on the left. We have Narmer. Narmer in his right hand is holding the war mace. He's grabbing the enemies by the hair. They're on their knees. Just above the enemy's head, we notice the falcon, and it's on top of what has like this elongated horizontal body and the head. I don't know if you can zoom in. Are you able to zoom in on that image? Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I got to give a shout out to Matt Simpson at Ancient Architects YouTube channel. He was the first to really conceptualize a theory around this. But in any event, this is a good demonstration of what the Sphinx may have originally looked like. So it's a good tool to use. So imagine the head was just an outcrop of stone, and then you fashion this body, and that looks, proportionately, that's fine. That would have been an early rendition of what the Sphinx would have looked like. And then right at the end was this big fissure.
Oh, shit.
Yes. The light bulb has gone off with Julian.
Yeah.
So right at it where you see it truncate in the back to the far right, what looks like his butt, they wanted to extend that to make hunches to turn it into an actual Sphinx. To make it have the hunches of the rump of the Sphinx. So they had to carve over the fissure. They had to expand the Sphinx. And then from there, they added a tail and they added legs. And then they added bricks to the front of that to make the paws of the Sphinx. And then over time, there's been different restorations and so forth. So what I'm saying is, look at your original Sphinx. This is aside from the outcropping of the rock, then they fashion the face, then they make the body, and everything would have been proportionate. Everything from the Great Fissure forward is proportionate. The reason why people think it's disproportionate and use that as evidence to say, oh, it was carved down from an older head, is because they're taking into account what the Sphinx looks like today, which would have had an expanded. Now go back to the Sphinx. Put in side profile of Egyptian Sphinx.
Side profile Egyptian Sphinx. Did I mishear this 10 minutes ago? I want to make sure I'm following all this because it's kind of blowing my mind. But you were saying that they elongated it over time?
Yeah, correct.
And how long is that time?
That's another $1 million question, Julian, and that's one I'm still trying to research, and I don't know how we could figure that out because, again, Mark Lehner accounts for it, but he doesn't say how long it took.
Right.
So we don't know exactly. Again, Schoch and Dobeke did seismic refraction survey. We can kind of determine dating from their interpretations with some things in the back because the levels in the back are like, 1 to 3 meters, and then it dips down. Anyway, so here's the side profile. So look at the big picture we're looking at here on the right. You see where it's like light in the back? It looks like light's reflecting. From where the light reflects back is where the Great Fissure is. Actually, can you put in, well, before we move off of this, so from that light source forward, kind of matches, and now imagine if the paws weren't there, it kind of matches that image you've seen of a horizontal body with a head.
Yeah.
That and keep in mind that Narmer palette goes back to the earliest parts of Egyptian civilization, right? And so,
but it doesn't have the thing sticking up.
It doesn't have the thing sticking out, but the Sphinx is missing something sticking out of its head, because so Google.
But the things were in the Narmer's palette.
Go back to Narmer's. Click on Narmer's palette. Let's go back to Narmer's palette.
Narmer's palette.
Yeah. Okay. So you see, well, it's sticking out of the back.
Right.
Now go back to the image of the Sphinx. And look at the image in the middle, the white background, how it has a crown. The Sphinx has a crown. Do you see second row, third image in?
Oh, yeah.
Has a crown. It likely would have had one. The Sphinx today has a giant hole in its head. It goes down about 6 feet. However, it was filled with cement in the early 20th century by Emile Barrace, an Egyptologist. So there's still images of it where you could see a man, before they filled it with cement, you can see a man standing inside of the hole in the head of the Sphinx. And we can get into the different entrances into the Sphinx in the so-called Hall of Records if you want to cover that too.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah,
I did a whole expose on this on my YouTube channel, Anyextee on YouTube, where I go into the hidden entrances, origins, and mysteries of the Great Sphinx.
Link in description, by the way. It's an excellent channel, so everyone make sure you go subscribe to that. But go ahead.
Thank you kindly. And I will confirm it is an excellent channel. It just doesn't have. Don't let the low subscribers fool you. I think I have like about 50K. I never get fooled
by that. If it's quality, it's quality. I don't give a fuck.
Well, people tell me all the time. They're like, "Me, you have all this amazing content, all this knowledge, and,
it's all right.
Nobody's
you just
talking."
need your spark. Here you go. Let's get it.
Thank you, Julian.
All right. So here we go.
So if you go, I lived in Luxor. In Luxor, we have the Luxor. I lived in Egypt for a while. When you go to Luxor Museum, there's a small Sphinx statue of King Tut as the Sphinx. He takes on another form. And you can see the crown on the head of the statue. It's like a Lego piece. It goes into the hole and snaps together. So it's likely that the Sphinx, the Great Sphinx, once had a crown, now missing. Also, it had a beard, and we know it had the beard, the royal beard of the pharaoh. It broke off because the pieces are in the Cairo Museum and the British Museum. Multiple pieces, and it likely had a statue of Osiris that was added beneath the beard. Those pieces are missing today. My point is, though, if you were to extend, so if we go back to the other image where the light is on the side profile of the Sphinx there, if you take into account from where you see the light in the dark in the back rump of the Sphinx, that's right around where the fissure is, and everything forward would be proportionate. The head is proportionate. Forget the pause. Pretend there's no pause. The head is proportionate to this horizontal mound, which looks similar to the motif that we find on the Narmer palette. And what I'm proposing is that, and what it says in the Egyptological record is that in order to form a rump in the back, they had to go past the fissure, and that's what gives it that look. And now that they've created this big rump, the Sphinx appears disproportionate, but then they go and add the tail and the paws. And so people take that and they're like, the head is too small, it doesn't fit the body, because the original body isn't the body we see today. And it probably developed over time from an outcropping. Maybe they carved the face, and then they decided to carve out the horizontal platform. And then they decided to turn it into a Sphinx, and they added it might not have been one concept from the beginning, and it wouldn't be unusual for it to come out of the living bedrock. It has a deeper esoteric, there's a cosmological concept to it, the one coming out of creation, like a lot of these block statues where people are coming out of the block. Yes. It's spirit trapped in matter. It's another way of expressing it. So that's it. So it's not that the head is disproportionate to the body, it's disproportionate to the body we see today, and that body is an expansion of what was likely the original concept for the Sphinx.
And what were your findings in all the different holes and crevices of the Sphinx that you did the full video on? Because I watched this one. This was pretty nuts.
Yeah. So and I've changed. Well, I won't say I changed my views, but in the video,
that's okay.
I champion John. Well, I do change my views. In the video, I champion John Anthony West's theory, the water erosion theory, and I explain it. I talk about all the entrances, but I also talk about the water erosion hypothesis and make a strong case for it. But today, this video's, I don't know how many years old, but and I don't mind telling somebody's story or somebody's narrative. It doesn't mean that I personally agree or conclude. So back to the water erosion theory with John Anthony West, because Egypt didn't see that kind of water, it must mean that it's older. And so Schoch made two observations: the water erosion on the body of the Sphinx, and then, the erosion on the Sphinx enclosure itself, which suggested that it was precipitation-induced water erosion. In other words, rainfall that had eroded the Sphinx over time. And then the other observation was from the geophysical survey. I said he did a seismic refraction survey where they set lines up around the Sphinx to determine. And from that, this is interesting too, because a lot of people will argue the Sphinx is 10,000 years old, 20,000 years old, 30,000 years old. According to Dr. Robert Schoch's work, with that seismic refraction survey with Thomas DeBecke in early 90s, the Sphinx cannot be more than 10,000 years old. And when Schoch first started with West, he was still, with university, he was up for tenure, so he had to be very cautious, and he took a conservative approach. And he said, okay, the Sphinx is likely, it could go back 5,000-6,000 years. He was taking a conservative approach, even though the data shows it could go back further. But he was trying to find a conservative approach because Egyptology suggests the Sphinx is around 2,500 BC. Schoch saying, it could be 5,000-6,000 years earlier, because that puts it back to a period where there was heavier rainfall. Later in his career, after performing at Contact in the Desert and Ancient Alien conferences and being on Ancient Aliens and getting all these speaking gigs, he changes his interpretation, and now he pushes it back and says, no, actually, I think it's closer to 10,000 BC. Could be as old as 10,000 BC. But it can't, according to his data, which is behind a paywall and difficult to get to, if you go look at that data, according to the data, it can't be older than 10,000 BC. Based on the results, his own data sets. So this makes a case for Sphinx not being older than 10,000 BC. Me personally, I think it's right around where the Egyptologists say it is. Maybe a few hundred years older. I will say, I don't believe the Sphinx was carved before 3,500 BCE.
Based on what?
Well, there's brand new evidence. There's a new study that came out in 2022. John Anthony West passed away in 2018, and I often ask myself, what would he say in the face of this evidence? There's also a new proponent for the other side, Robert Schneiker, geophysicist, who's making a case for this as well. The study was about the Khufu branch of the Nile. They discovered this branch. It came off the Nile. There are these canals that would go right up to the pyramids. And the study also shows that during periods in Egypt that during the African humid period and before that, there was so much rainfall that the position of the Sphinx, it's low on the Mokattam rock formation, it's low on the platform, on the plateau, and it's right next to where the water is, that at this time, the Sphinx would have been covered in water, that the water flow would have been much higher and much more forceful. So Robert Schneiker contends that, with this knowledge and with this being the case, as well as he's got a lot more to, add to this, I won't articulate his narrative as well. In fact, he's somebody you may want to have on the show. In fact, if you really want to have an event, what needs to happen right now in this space is for Robert Schneiker and Dr. Robert Schoch to have a debate.
Let's do it, boys.
You can do it right here on the Julian Dorey podcast.
Boys. You can come co-host it with me.
I can't speak for someone else. I don't think Schoch will do it, but I'm fairly certain.
Come on, Bobby. Come on, baby.
Schneider would love to do it because
I don't bite.
This is the newest information, and Schoch is still repeating all the old information, his old narrative, and he has not. And he said himself in the past, if it can be demonstrated I was wrong, I'll stand correct. But he has not yet once addressed the issues that are being raised by Robert Schneiker, and a lot of people get this wrong. I just watched I remember the Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble debate on Joe Rogan.
That was a tough one.
They talk about how Rogan has it in his mind that all the geologists agree with Dr. Robert Schoch, that there's a consensus. That isn't accurate. That's because that's what he was told, because that's a story that's been perpetuated, and that's not exactly what happened. The reason for this is in the early 90s, John Anthony West, Dr. Robert Schoch went to a geological convention. They weren't actually part of the actual presentation. They were in a sense that they had a poster board out in the hallway. They weren't on the conference panels. They had a poster board in the hallway to present this theory. They collected a lot of emails, and that's the extent of it. That doesn't mean the emails they collected from other geologists is a strong cosign in their theory.
Right.
It's not. In fact, several independent geologists, most geologists don't care about the Sphinx, but several independent geologists have studied it. And there's this idea that needs to be dismantled today on the Julian Dorey podcast, that all the geologists are against the Egyptologists. And in fact, I don't know any geologist that entirely agree with Dr. Robert Schoch's conclusion. You have Lal Gary, though you have the geologist that originally said it was wind and sand erosion. Then Schoch says, no, it's precipitation-induced water erosion. Therefore, the Sphinx must be older because Egypt didn't see this amount of water during the time that the Egyptologists are saying. You also have Colin Reeder, who aligns with some of Schoch's ideas. And I like Reeder's. This is why I think the Sphinx could be a few hundred years earlier than the Egyptologists thing. Reeder puts together a great presentation. He's also a geologist, and he's independently studied at the Sphinx. He says he wrote a paper that Khufu knew the Sphinx. Khufu is the father of Khafra. Since the Sphinx is supposed to have been fashioned during the time of Khafra, Khufu shouldn't know about the Sphinx. Why does he say this? Because of the inventory stealer.
The inventory stealer.
The inventory stealer. It was discovered at Giza. It was behind, it was at the Isis temple, which is...
Oh, that's unfortunately named, but I know.
You're absolutely right, because that's the Greek word for Iset or
exactly.
Oset.
It was such a beautiful name, and they fucked
until
it
the
up.
terrorists...
Right.
Well, the thing is, I know it's often associated with the terrorists, but that's actually the Greek term for Oset or Iset.
Right, exactly.
It's Osir and Oset, Osiris, and even Horus is actually Heru.
Yeah.
It means the house of Hathor. So anyway, Iset, Isis, strong character and, figure in Egyptian tradition. It was a temple that was consecrated to her, the remains, and there they found the inventory stela. And on this stela, it references Khufu, and it references the Sphinx. How is this possible? Khufu predates the Sphinx. How could it be referencing Khufu in the Sphinx? Well, let's turn to Egyptology, what the Egyptologists say. Because we can just take the alternative historians and YouTubers who want to sell books and tours at their word and think the Egyptologists are covering stuff up, or we can actually go to the Egyptologists. And this is what I'm trying to do by bringing more balance.
Bridge the gap, yeah.
Yeah, because, I lived in Egypt. I used to sit down and drink coffee. I'd go into their homes. I met their families. These are real people with children and family. It's not some evil cabal conspiracy theories that are trying to cover everything up.
I don't like the idea of defining everything as one. What has pissed me off in the past is when the ivory tower causes that hardcore reaction on the other side. Fuck that. And I've called that out before. But the idea that, therefore, everyone is Zahi Hawass or whatever, that's not fair. I want to judge facts on their individual basis or whatever.
Yeah, so I agree. And that's why I think it's important to bring balance to the conversation and actually look at the archaeological record, because you can go to the alternative side and have them go, oh, the Egyptologists, they're just covering everything up. What do they know? Here's the real evidence. See it on my YouTube channel. Or you can actually make the effort, like I did, to go into the record and see what they actually say. Don't wait for the alternative historian to cherry pick one phrase and attack. Go and study it. Right. Learn the Egyptian hieroglyphs.
That's right.
The hieroglyphs will tell you what's in the relief.
Let's finish up this point on the Sphinx and some of the holes and crevices within it that we've been beating around the bush on right here, and then we're gonna take a quick break, go to the bathroom, and come back, and it's gonna be a second episode. Like we're flowing right here. So anyway, let's finish this point, and then we'll do that.
This is a long point because there's a lot of entrances to the Sphinx. Let's run through them quickly. This will be, if you want a more detailed, you can go back to my YouTube channel,
We'll link
Anyextee, to check it out. So anyway, okay, hidden entrances into the Sphinx, and why is this important? Because of the Hall of Records. You're familiar with the Hall of Records?
Yes.
The Hall of Records. So basically, what you have is something known as the Hall of Records, and it was popularized by Edgar Cayce, the sleeping American prophet. Edgar Cayce would lay down, go to sleep, and then come back and give readings that would be recorded. And he would make predictions. He has all sort of prophecies. A lot of them didn't line up. But one of the things he said is that there's a Hall of Records beneath the paws of the Sphinx. And I used to believe it was a possibility. Back in 1996, my friends and I, we were making rap songs about the Hall of Records under the paws of the Sphinx, you know? But is there actually a Hall of Records under the Sphinx? And this whole idea that it was popularized by Edgar Cayce, right? Wrong. It actually predates Edgar Cayce. Okay, before Edgar Cayce, you have the first imperator of the Rosicrucian order, Amorc. That is the ancient mystical order of Rosicrucians, the Rosicrucian order Amorc, which is still active today. Their first imperator, Harvey Spencer Lewis, published a book, proprietary information at first. Now you can find it publicly. It was produced by and for the Rosicrucians, Symbolic Prophecy of the Sphinx. And within that book, he includes a diagram of what appears to be a temple beneath the Sphinx. He says it came from a Rosicrucian manuscript. Keep in mind, the Rosicrucians were in Egypt very early on. They were there during the time of eminent Egyptologist Salim Hussein, who was doing excavations at the Sphinx. Did they get information? Where did this come from? There's a lot of controversy around this, Julian, because there's another esoteric author who goes by the pen name El-Eros. El-Eros, yeah, and he had his own Knights Templar organization that he created. And a lot of these Knights Templar organizations, when you actually, I have a film on the, anyway, whatever.
Next episode.
Another episode. So, so the Hall of Records, originally the Hall of Mysteries, according to El-Eros, years before the Edgar Cayce prophecy. And this hall and hidden temple under the Sphinx was published in Harvey Spencer Lewis's book, The Rose. How would Edgar Cayce know this? Well, we know because it's on record that he has this organization, ARE, and West Virginia, I believe. Anyway, there in the archives, it's marked in the 300s somewhere, we have evidence, proof that he had clients who were Rosicrucians. And Edgar Cayce was well aware of esoteric literature. So he most likely read Harvey Spencer Lewis's account or had access to the other account, which is El-Eros. El-Eros talked about a hall of mysteries under the Sphinx. He talked about a whole Masonic plan for Egypt. How did he know? He said it was channeled. He channeled it. Channeled.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very trustworthy.
Yeah. So whenever there's channeling involved, I would take it with a grain of salt. Not to say I don't believe that humans have the ability to go within and connect with the divine.
I'm channeling an 18-inch cock right now.
What does it look like, Julian?
I don't have it. I'm sorry.
Well, it takes years of initiation through esoteric traditions.
That's right.
Meditations. And I mean, there's been some people that have done amazing things. Paramahansa Yogananda would be one who through meditation. You know Yogananda? Yogananda. Nope. Oh, man. You know who you have an iPhone?
Yeah.
You know who Steve Jobs is, right?
I know who Steve Jobs is.
At Steve Jobs' memorial service, he left one gift behind for his friends and a message, self-actualize. And that gift was, and when he passed, when he transitioned into the afterlife, there was only one book on his iPhone in the digital ebooks section. That book was Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda.
I don't remember this. Wow. I've studied Steve Jobs' life like crazy, but I don't remember.
Yeah, Steve Jobs developed the iPhone through meditation. He conceptualized a lot through meditation, and he was a big fan of Yogananda. Yogananda brought Kriya Pranayama Yoga meditation to the West.
He brought what?
Yeah, Kriya Pranayama Yoga meditation.
Okay.
And so it's in short, it's the science of Kriya Yoga. It's a tradition that goes back, Hindu tradition that goes back. And he learned from his mentor, Sri Yukteswar, and before him, Babaji. There's a whole lineage. Anyway, Yogananda came to the East. It was my hometown of Boston, and he traveled to Mexico. He settled in California, where they have today his organization, the which I'm a member of, Self-Realization Fellowship. If you want to learn the science of Kriya Pranayama Yoga, which is effectively how you channel the inner currents, subtle currents in your body, and work them up through the glands, through different breathing exercises and breathing, you change your breath, you change your consciousness, and use that to interact with the glands, which correspond in Eastern tradition to the chakras, or what the Rosicrucians refer to as psychic centers, which science can't measure. But if there's a whole process, the process is to ultimately channel that energy up to your back, through your spine, to have what's known as a Kundalini experience.
Yeah,
the serpent goes up the spine.
I know that one.
You're shaking, you're bringing the energy up to your pineal gland, your third eye.
Yeah.
But it's not, everybody talks about the third eye. This is your mystical eye. You close your eyes, you can still see, you can still remember and create, right? You have inner vision.
That's right.
Right? So not limited to your sight and your senses. You also have your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland. And they don't really teach us a lot about these things in school. The glands are so, even in modern science today, like we know a bit, but we don't know everything about the glands. Esoteric traditions, like the Rosicrucians, focus on teaching about the glands because, it was important for the mystical process. Your hypothalamus is and your pituitary gland is what's going to effectively help you to achieve, you could say, altered states of consciousness. Also, we have what's known as von Economo neurons. There's a heavy concentration, dense concentration of von Economo neurons named after von Economo in the front of our head. The whole idea is to suppress those neurons, to open up a connection. This is gnosis, to channel, to receive a divine connection. It's like your brain is a projector. You go into the light of the projector to receive. It's not that your brain, people will be like, oh, when you meditate, you got to close out the monkey mind chatter. You have to stop what's going on. You can never stop thinking, but you can move things around in a way, according to these traditions, to access. This is what Indian rishis and yogis have been doing for years.
So you got into this because you were saying this dude was channeling by the fucking poles.
Well, I got into Yogananda because of Steve Jobs, because the whole thing is Steve Jobs' channel. He wanted everyone to know about Yogananda and his work. Yogananda is in my top 3 must-read books. Okay?
I might have to check that out.
Autobiography of a Yogi changed my life. Yeah. You might need to suspend some of your imagination in the beginning, but go through the book. The thing that really does it for me is Yogananda died consciously. When you look into the eyes of Paramahansa Yogananda, when you look into the eyes of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, you're going to know. You're going to see something, and you're going to realize this is a realized individual. There's something different about them. Yogananda would teach Kriya Pranayama Yoga, and he died conscious. He chose the moment of his death. He said, and before an audience, I am going to die now. Dropped, died, and his body didn't decompose.
Whoa.
Look up Paramahansa Yogananda.
All right. Yeah. I'm going to have to check this out afterwards. But who was the guy channeling?
So back to the channeling. I'm glad you keep me on track here, Julian.
Yeah, I got to. So, I'm trying to help you. I know you got to go to the bathroom.
My whole point is there's meditative practices which I find very interesting. I practice meditation.
I saw you doing it right before
I did the interview. So I try to make time to meditate every day. If I had it my way and life didn't get in the way, the 2 things I love most, reading and meditation. But if I had to choose one, it would be meditation. I love to be in a constant state of meditation, cosmic bliss, connecting with.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So anyway, and when I say meditation and yoga, I'm not talking about these poses. Those poses are like, they're for specific currents in your body. There's a whole science to it. Anyway, so I was just trying to make a disclaimer that, like, I don't want to turn people off and think like, all channeling is fake. I will say that I think a vast majority of people that claim to be channeling are faking the funk to sell books, get attention. Absolutely. Maybe they believe it themselves. You can never tell another person's personal experience. So I don't want to judge anyone, but I will say that there are a lot of authors who tend to use channeling as evidence for whatever it is they're presenting. Like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Dorey will channel them. Anyway, so channeling isn't really verifiable. You know,
So
it's
this
hard
guy's channeling isn't, you know, we can't take that as...
Who are we even talking about? Who was channeling?
It was the guy...
Oh, Eliros. So Eliros channeled this Masonic plan. And there's some controversy. Who came first? Harvey Spencer Lewis's book or Eliros? We're not exactly certain, but it's quite possible that... you know, one influenced the other. We don't know with certainty. But anyway, long story short, then you get, you know, fast forward almost a decade, you have what everyone knows is Edgar Cayce. He's the one that the Hall of Records, they think originates with him. It doesn't. It originates with the Rosicrucians and with Eliros. But Edgar Cayce said there's a Hall of Records under the Sphinx. So it set this big craze off where everyone wanted to go and check beneath the Sphinx. There's been multiple studies where they found cavities around the Sphinx, natural cavities beneath the Sphinx. When Dr. Robert Schoch and Thomas Dobeke did the seismic refraction survey around the Sphinx, they detected a big anomaly north of the Sphinx, and they believe that there's something that appears to look like a chamber. And this is Schoch's interpretation. He says because it appears to be right angles, and there are supposed to be, or it's believed that there's not any exact right angles in nature, although you can find some instances, you know, but there's not supposed to be angles in nature. So the whole idea is, well, look, if this looks like a right angle, it must be a subterranean structure, which gives credit to Edgar Cayce's Hall of Records. I mentioned Mark Lehner earlier. He's the foremost Egyptologist when it comes to the Sphinx. He did this the big study, the official one on the Sphinx. He got into this, like me, came into this through the alternative side. His parents were a part of the Edgar Cayce organization. In fact, that organization funded his education to become an actual Egyptologist, archaeologist, so that he could go find this Hall of Records. And he did that. And after he looked at everything in the Sphinx, he came to the realization that, you know, it's not what they say it is. And now he's all the way on the other side of the field. And he's one of the main proponents with Zahi that, you know, and that's what often happens. That's like me. I came in through the fascination and the sensationalism, but then I wanted to study and dig deeper. And when you look at the stuff, you realize that it's not all, you know, what it's cracked up to be. So, so that's basically, you know, you have a Hall of Records. And so how do you get into that Hall of Records? This is where it opens up, you know, the entrances. How would we get into the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx? Let's talk about entrances into the Sphinx.
Please.
There's an entrance between the paws that few people know about. Between the paws of the Sphinx is what's known as the Dream Stealer, which is the work of Tutmosis IV. It commemorates him clearing. He went to the Sphinx, he fell asleep or got into a meditative state by the Sphinx and channeled the Sphinx. The Sphinx spoke to him. This is Egyptian history. The Sphinx came to him in a dream. And you have to be careful whenever they put dream in literal text because we're not entirely certain what that means because we could be interpreting it as dream, but it could be an altered state of consciousness. It could be a meditative state. And the Sphinx came to him, Hor-em-Akhet, one of the names of the Sphinx, right? Sphinx has been known by many names throughout history. Hor-em-Akhet, Horus on the horizon. Seshep-Ankh-Atum, living image of Atum. Abu Hol, the terrifying one, Tefnut, Spit-a-Nut, and recent textual evidence in alternative circles suggested it may have been Mahit. Anyway, we know that Tutmosis IV was referring to him as Hor-em-Akhet, Horus on the horizon, because it's in this stela. Stela is a stone that commemorates an experience that has all hieroglyphs, and it references the Sphinx as Hor-em-Akhet. And so at this time, this is in the New Kingdom of Egypt. The Sphinx is already ancient. The Sphinx is supposed to have come into fashion in the Old Kingdom. This is the New Kingdom. And the Sphinx tells Tutmosis, clear away the sand from my paws, because it was up to its neck in sand. Clear away the sand, and you'll have the right to rule over Egypt. So he did that to legitimize himself. He built a wall, a Temenus wall, to prevent more wind and sand from blowing on.
Right.
So how do we know how to get into the Sphinx? Behind this dream stela, it's covered up now because the Egyptologists have done a cover up, but not intentionally. They're trying to preserve it.
Yeah.
In most cases, when they're covering something up, it's because they don't want people to go in and fall down, get hurt, and have a liability, or they just haven't finished publishing academic papers on it. So it's not ready. It's not that they're trying to hide lost technology from the public. Believe me, I know the Egyptologists. They wish there was lost technology. Their jobs would be easier, you know? And so Egypt would be further along. It wouldn't be struggling in a developing country in a sense. So there's this passage beneath the Sphinx, and I had long thought that if there is an entrance to the Hall of Records, it must be between the paws of the Sphinx. You have two paws, this is the, rule of thirds, two flanking, either there's two obelisks or two pylons, which from two paws, where would they be? It would be in the center. And so I was like, but you can't see because the Dream Steel is there, and they've built up this little structure that has a trap door, an iron trap door that you can go down into. Well, we can't see what's in there. So if you were to come to Egypt on your own accord, and you were to go to the Giza Plateau, have you ever been to Egypt?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
I was
Probably
there.
younger with your family or something?
I was there when I was 16 for a couple days and when I was 18 for a couple days.
So you couldn't really appreciate the deeper
that's
esoteric
exactly right.
aspects
Yes.
that you will when
I thought-
Anyextee brings you to Egypt.
Exactly. I thought it was so cool. Don't get me wrong. We went to pyramids. I was like, wow, awesome. All right, let's go.
Yeah,
like there was,
basically. Take a picture.
and I love history, but at that point in my life, I wasn't yet like crazy deep on like ancient history at the time. So it was just really cool. Like, wow, they built this, but I wasn't thinking about all the little details and intricate things of like, wait a minute, how the fuck did this even happen? And now, if I went there, I'd be like, oh,
And you'd know more. You'd have
Yes,
more context and that's important. So
I still gotta learn so much. I'm such a novice with it, but it's so cool.
it's
I
a
enjoy
lifetime of learning, man.
Yes.
I've been doing it for 2 decades. I'm still learning, you know? If you were to go to Egypt on your own accord, you didn't go in between the paws of the Sphinx.
Nope.
Because there's a wall around it. It's all monetized now. And in order to go in there, it requires very expensive special permits with the government. And they have to approve it with the Ministry of Antiquities and Tourism.
Listen, I'll bring Vinny and Carmine over there. They'll approve that shit real fast. Believe me.
We don't need Vinny and Carmine because Anyextee has relationships from Alexandria to Aswan,
right.
and they love me
Okay.
over there.
All right.
I was there during the Egyptian Revolution filming, and they actually all love John Anthony West, contrary to popular belief.
That's cool.
So coming up under him, a lot of people show me a lot of love in Egypt, and they know I live there. Point is, when I do my tours, we get access there. We open a tour up with exclusive private access at dawn before Giza even opens up to the general public. Just my group gets to go. They unlock the doors, let us in, and we get to go in between the paws of the Sphinx. The only thing we can't do is go through that trap door that they keep locked to see what's in between the dream stela and the chest of the Sphinx. So I've long thought that there must be like, maybe if there's an entrance, it would be there, but we can't see because it's covered up. So I took the time to do the research, dug into the archaeological record, and looked at very old accounts. Some of the earliest excavations go back to Giovanni Battista, who was also an esotericist. And he cleared away the Sphinx. And then later, Henry Salt, the ambassador, he was like an ambassador, British consul. He boarded up. There's accounts of him blocking it up with stone. So there was something there. So my point is, maybe he blocked it up and we don't know, but there's an entrance into the Sphinx. So I continued my research. I didn't just stop at the literary texts. I did my anthropology work. I went into the local culture. I started talking to people in the village of Nazat Saman that lived directly across from the Sphinx, specifically the elders who lived there before Giza was monetized, like my friend Gamal. He used to take people into the Osiris shaft and have people sleep inside the Sphinx before it became monetized, before they put a wall and charged a ticket. And he told me, he's like, we call it the heart of the Sphinx. The heart of the Sphinx? Yeah, we'd go into the Sphinx. I said, so there is an entrance into the Sphinx? Because often you'll hear Zahi Hawass say, there's no entrances, nothing to see here, move along. He said, yeah, as children, we used to play there. All the children knew about it. We would go into the chest of the Sphinx. I was like, tell me more. What are the dimensions? He couldn't say. He's like, maybe a few feet or meters, but there's an opening, a cavity that goes into the Sphinx.
And what does that tell us?
It tells us that, well, we know there's a cavity that goes in. How far does it go in? We don't know. Could something be covered up that we don't know about and that we're missing that could be a passage into the Hall of Records? My intuition at this point says no. I was more interested in this before. Now I think not so much.
Why do you say no?
Just everything I know. Even John Anthony West told me don't place too much stock in a Hall of Records under the Sphinx. Even though Dr. Robert Schoch's survey, who was his colleague, his comrade in arms, says that there's an anomaly beneath the Sphinx which appears to have straight right edges, which would signal a chamber right beneath the paws of the Sphinx, like Edgar Casey said. John Anthony West said I wouldn't place too much stock. Most of the Casey predictions didn't turn out to be accurate. And in addition to that, I know that the story of the Hall of Records is something that Casey likely adopted from these early esoteric, these secret societies had literature they'd pass around. Casey likely had awareness of this, and that's why he channeled it and it got written down. How do you have somebody, just a few years before you talking about a Hall of Mysteries beneath the paws of the Sphinx, and suddenly you out of nowhere have this Hall of Records beneath the paws of the Sphinx?
That's right.
Yeah, so
Funky.
But one thing that gives it some credibility and why I wanted to conduct the research in the first place is because in the back of the Sphinx, there's another entrance. In the rump, we've talked about the rump and the hunch of the Sphinx.
There's another entrance in what we were looking at up here, back there, like where the tail is.
Go to the back of the Sphinx. Maybe if you can pull up rear of the Sphinx.
All right, here's what we're going to do, because I know we both are about to piss our pants. We're going to hold this off to the second episode. So we're going to open that up with the rear of the Sphinx with this full explanation. We're going to go through the Emerald Tablets. We're going to go through the Luxor Temple. We're going to go through some secret societies and the Templars. We're going to go through all the good shit. We'll get to the fucking aliens in the second one. But right there, let's pause that for the end of the first episode. So if you haven't subscribed to Anyextee's channel, the link is in the description below. Please make sure you do that. Fucking awesome stuff, as you can tell. And subscribe to my channel as well. And we'll see you for the next one. Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.